When my husband, Walter, and I went to visit my in-laws, my mother-in-law picked us up from the airport, but instead of welcoming us warmly, she said, "You can't ride in the car, so you'll have to walk home." She snorted and turned her nose up at us. The walk was 3 hours one way. Even though I'm physically strong, this felt like too much, and I almost cried. Fortunately, someone helped me in the end, and it was my mother-in-law who ended up regretting her actions. My name is Jennifer. I'm 30 years old and married to Walter, who is 2 years younger than me. I love mountain climbing, and we met in college through the mountain club. Walter is handsome and popular with women, so when he asked me out, I was surprised. I wondered, why me? Walter told me, Jennifer always moves forward silently, even on the hardest paths, without complaining. That's what I like about her. Walter works for a well-known company and earns a good salary. We've been happily married since our wedding, much like how things were when we were in college. However, one thing bothers me. Oh, it's a call from Mom. Sorry, I need to talk to her, Walter said during dinner as he rushed to his room with his phone. His mother calls him every 2 days. She adores her son, and Walter is very kind to her. Sometimes, I even wonder if he's a bit of a mama's boy, but since she raised him well, I try to respect her, too. It seems, though, she doesn't feel the same about me. Before we got married, when we went to visit my in-laws, she wasn't happy to see me. Jennifer is 2 years older than my son. She's almost 30, she said, clearly displeased. She seemed unhappy the whole time. Walter's father, however, didn't mind. He said, "It's fine, love conquers all. Jennifer seems reliable, and she's perfect for Walter, who can be a bit weak at times," but that only seemed to make my mother-in-law angrier. Since she couldn't argue with her husband directly, she started picking on me in secret. One time, she said, "Oh no, Jennifer, it looks like the snacks I gave you have gone bad. I'll get new ones." After intentionally giving me spoiled food, she would make a face, snort, and twist her lips whenever she harassed me. But I didn't let it bother me. I smiled and said, "It's okay, I can eat it," and I cut off the bad part of the dried fruit and ate the rest. My mountain climbing experience had taught me to eat what I could, even if the food wasn't great. Walter and his father laughed. "That's just like Jennifer." Walter's father then said, "Honey, that's not right. Don't give Jennifer something like that." Despite the situation, the mood remained light. I laughed, but I didn't miss the sharp look my mother-in-law gave me, or the slight sound of her clicking her tongue. There were other incidents, like when she said, "Look, I went to Italy last week and bought souvenirs." She gave Walter a high-quality branded tie, but for me, she handed over a cheap, flimsy t-shirt with a fake-looking logo, clearly a knockoff. "Come on, Walter, try on the tie. Jennifer, you try on the shirt too," she said. I saw that familiar expression on her face and realized this was another one of her little ways to harass me. I forced a smile and said, I can't wear a tie with casual clothes." I added, "I'm not up for it right now either," trying to keep the mood light, but inside, I was fed up. Later, I only used that t-shirt for chores like weeding in the summer or as a joke to show my friends in photos. I hated even looking at it. Her harassments were subtle, only I could really tell they were intentional. When I told Walter, he would just say, "Mom's a bit quirky, so just forgive her," but the small acts of malice slowly wore me down. We lived about an hour away from my in-laws, and the fact that we could easily visit them whenever they wanted was a constant source of gloom for me. Then one day, Walter gave me sudden news. "Jennifer, I'm sorry, but I've been transferred to a new location. It starts next month, so we'll need to start preparing," he said. Though Walter apologized, I secretly felt relieved. This transfer would give us an excuse to put some distance between us and his mother. Plus, the new location was close to my parents' home, which felt like moving from stress to comfort. "Got it. I'll take care of the preparations and ask my family for help," I said cheerfully, excited to get away from my mother-in-law's constant petty harassment. While I was a little nervous about starting a new life, most of my feelings were about the relief of being free from her. We moved, and I thought I could finally put some distance between us, but soon after settling in, I got another call from her. "Hello, Jennifer, where have you been? You didn't answer the phone. You're not neglecting my son while hanging out at your parents' house again, are you?" she asked, clearly accusing me. I wanted to sigh heavily, but I held back and replied, "I'm sorry, I couldn't answer earlier. I was in line at the checkout." Walter might be tired in this new environment. I wanted to support Walter with nutritious meals since he was adjusting to the new environment. But my mother-in-law started calling every 2 days. Even though we saw each other less, we talked more, though it was mostly her making snide comments. She'd say things like, "My son is sensitive. I wonder if someone with such thick skin like Jennifer can understand him. His high school girlfriend was so delicate, but his taste has really changed," making remarks that made me uncomfortable. I began to wonder if she was using me as her outlet for stress. I felt like a trash can for her frustrations. What hurt the most were her comments about children. She'd say, "Jennifer, you're already 30, aren't you? What do you think about having children? I wonder if, being older than my son, you can have a normal child." I was shocked that someone would say such a thing in this day and age. Since this was already a sensitive topic for me, I cried after hanging up the phone. Did she really think I wouldn't be hurt by her words? The calls kept coming, but I responded politely to avoid causing any drama. Maybe she got bored of not getting a reaction from me, because the number of calls gradually decreased. I felt relieved, deeply. On New Year's Day the following year, Walter and I went to visit my in-laws. They were supposed to pick us up from the airport. When we arrived, Walter's dad greeted us warmly. "Hey Walter, Jennifer, long time no see." His friendliness was a relief since I had been dreading seeing my mother-in-law. "Happy New Year, Mom and Dad," Walter said. "Happy New Year," I added. We exchanged New Year's greetings, but my mother-in-law didn't even look at me. Maybe she was angry because I had been distant on the phone. It was a tense and awkward situation, and I wasn't sure how I'd get through it. Walter's father, trying to lighten the mood, said cheerfully, "You must be tired from the journey. Shall we take a break at the airport cafe?" "Oh, that's a great idea. Isn't there one on the second floor?" Walter responded, and we all headed to the cafe. While the men chatted away, my mother-in-law and I sat in silence. After we ordered, I got up and said, "Excuse me, I'm going to the restroom," hoping for a moment to gather myself. "Oh, maybe I'll go too," my mother-in-law said, standing up to follow me. I immediately had a bad feeling about it. As we neared the entrance to the women's restroom, my mother-in-law, walking behind me, suddenly said, "You can't ride in the car, so why don't you walk back?" I didn't understand what she meant, so I turned to look at her. She had that familiar expression on her face and said, "We're going back as a family of 3. You're a stranger, aren't you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Walk back from the airport to their house? How far could that even be? And calling me, her son's wife, a stranger? I was frozen in shock as she continued her verbal attack. "I've been kind enough to call you frequently, but unlike Walter, you only respond coldly. Living near your parents has gone to your head. I don't want to think of you as my daughter-in-law. You're a stranger, a complete stranger." Her voice was getting louder. I was shocked, but didn't want to argue in public, so I quietly said, "Yes, I understand." I didn't feel like going back to where Walter and my father-in-law were, so I headed toward the airport exit, walking slowly. Even though she told me to walk back, I was at an airport. There had to be taxis or buses. I could take one and walk the rest of the way, but more than the physical distance, I worried about what would happen when I arrived. How was I supposed to face my in-laws after all this? How would I spend the next few days there? I checked my phone for transportation options. There was a bus leaving in 10 minutes, but it wouldn't take me all the way. I'd still have to walk for about 3 hours to get to their house. 3 hours. I could walk that easily with my mountain climbing experience, but this wasn't the same. Walking, because I wasn't allowed in the car due to harassment, felt different. Tears welled up in my eyes. Was this my fault? Had I been too distant with her on the phone? Would this have happened if I had been more pleasant? While lost in thought, someone suddenly tapped me on the shoulder. "Jennifer, why are you walking here?" It was my father-in-law's voice. "Did my wife say something to you at the restroom entrance? I was headed there too and saw you two talking. Then you just started walking away," he said. As my father-in-law stood in front of me, ready to walk, the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. Seeing his kind face, I couldn't stop crying. "Jennifer, what on earth happened?" he asked. I decided to tell him everything. I explained exactly what my mother-in-law had said to me. To my surprise, my father-in-law became angrier than I had ever seen him. "She said that to my son's wife?" he exclaimed. Then, he said something unexpected. "I'll walk with you, Jennifer." Without hesitation, he started walking. I was shocked. Father-in-law," I started. "Don't worry," he said. "I enjoy mountain climbing. I used to climb a lot with Walter when he was younger. A 3-hour walk is nothing." Indeed, his stride was strong and confident. Not what you'd expect from someone 62 years old. Come on, let's go. Suddenly, I remembered something. We didn't tell Walter we were leaving, is that okay? In my shock over my mother-in-law's words, I had just walked off without thinking. Father-in-law reassured me, Walter will be fine. She'll probably talk him into waiting. I'll contact him. He took out his phone and sent a text to mother-in-law, telling her that he was walking back with me and that the car keys were in his bag. As we waited for the bus, his phone rang. Father-in-law answered it, sounding angry but controlled. It must have been mother-in-law on the other end. I could hear her voice shouting, trying to explain. I heard what you said to Jennifer, my father-in-law said firmly. If you're going to say that, I won't ride in the car either. I could hear my mother-in-law's panicked response, that's not it. She said she wanted to walk for exercise. How brazen. I was more stunned than angry. Father-in-law cut her off. We'll talk when we get home. He hung up and shoved his phone into his pocket. A moment later, my phone started ringing. It was definitely mother-in-law trying to call me. Father-in-law and I exchanged looks. We both decided to ignore it. I wasn't in the mood to deal with her. We silently boarded the bus and, once we got off, continued walking. This way's a shortcut, father-in-law said. There's a slope for a while, but let's do our best. With his occasional advice, it felt like we were mountain climbing together. However, I hadn't planned on walking so much today. I was wearing regular boots, and father-in-law was in leather shoes. This wasn't ideal for such a long walk. During the journey, I barely spoke but eventually asked, father-in-law, are your feet okay? Will walking in those shoes hurt after a while? He glanced at my feet, noticing my boots, and squinted thoughtfully. I guess we're in the same boat, my father-in-law said, sighing. Making a woman walk such a long distance in those shoes, unbelievable. We thought about calling a taxi, but neither of us suggested it. We both wanted to spite my mother-in-law. But Jennifer, you're strong, he added, walking such a long distance without complaining. That's probably why Walter was drawn to you. Hearing that made me feel a bit happy. We continued our walk, stopping at a grocery store for drinks to stay hydrated. After about 3 hours, as the sun was setting, we finally arrived at my in-laws' house. Their car was parked outside, so my mother-in-law and Walter were already home. We're back, my father-in-law said as he opened the front door. Walter rushed over. Jennifer, I was so worried. Why did you suddenly decide to walk back for exercise? Did Mom tell you that? I asked, surprised. That's not what happened. Mom told me to walk back. Father-in-law, now sitting tiredly on a chair, added, Jennifer didn't choose to walk. Your mom told her to. Mother-in-law came out of the living room, her face pale and shocked. No, that's not it. It's a misunderstanding, she stammered. What misunderstanding? I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You said, since you can't ride in the car, why don't you walk back, didn't you? That's the truth. I'm not going to lie about it. I smiled bitterly, adding, I was reminded of my mountain climbing days. That 3-hour walk was good exercise. Walter turned to look at his mother. He knew I wasn't the type to lie. The three of us, Walter, father-in-law, and I, stared at her. You believe this woman over me? She screamed. We're your family. She's a stranger, right? You believe a stranger over your own family? So I'm not allowed in the car because I'm a stranger? I said quietly. Mom, I can't believe you would say something like that, Walter said, his voice trembling with anger. Jennifer is an important part of my family. I wanted you to feel the same way. Walter clenched his fist, visibly upset. If you're going to treat Jennifer like this, I'm done with you. Mom, I won't answer your calls anymore, and don't contact Jennifer either. With that, he took my hand and said, let's go. Wait, Walter, his mother called out. But Walter slammed the door behind us without looking back. He held my hand tightly as we left. A year later. Hey, Jennifer, Walter, over here, you can see the view really well, Walter called out. Walter, my father-in-law, and I were mountain climbing together. 6 months after the New Year's incident, Walter received a transfer order, and we moved back to our previous home. After that, father-in-law decided to divorce my mother-in-law and move to a place near us. We started climbing together on weekends, and it became a regular activity. Shall we have lunch here? Walter suggested when we reached the summit. We eagerly began preparing our meal, and as we worked, father-in-law started talking. Your mom went on a spending spree after the divorce, he said. Even though we divided everything fairly, she's already having financial trouble. I think she was lonely. The divorce was tough on her, with all the crying and screaming. He paused, then added, "But I think it's better for both of us to keep some distance now. She needs to expand her world, otherwise, she'll just keep taking out her stress on the people close to her." I listened quietly to their conversation, thinking about what he said, looking out at the beautiful view from the mountain. I made a promise to myself: I will cherish my own world and not take out my stress on others. With my precious family by my side, I felt at peace.
Helen walked down the street, her feet barely moving. Recently, the elderly woman had received some money, so went to the nearest supermarket to buy potatoes, pasta, milk, flour and sugar. Although the bag had not been a burden for Helen before, it was heavy now. In her youth, working in the cowshed, she used to pull hay with a pitchfork and carry huge boxes and buckets filled with milk or water. But now she was over 60 years old, and age had taken its toll. Her back often ached, and her arms had weakened, so she struggled to drag the bags from the supermarket, taking slow breaks to catch her breath. A few passers-by tried to help her, including 2 teenage boys with school bags, a middle-aged woman, and a young, tall guy. Helen politely declined their assistance with a smile. She wasn't in a rush, and these kind people seemed busy with their own affairs, so why bother them? Helen walked slowly, not only because of the heavy bag, but also because she didn't want to go home. The place she was returning to could no longer be called her home. It was just a refuge. She used to have a spacious, bright and cosy house with a large kitchen. There was a vegetable garden and a carved gazebo, which her father had built. Her favourite friends and neighbours were nearby. Helen lived well there, despite the hard work. Most of her life was spent working in the farm's cowshed, taking care of the animals. She tried her best to provide everything her son needed. She would leave before dawn and return after sunset. Her back, arms and legs had been aching back then, but she remembered those times with nostalgia. She felt much happier than she did now. Suddenly, November's cold rain started to fall. It came unexpected, drizzling down as if someone had opened a faucet of ice water upstairs. Helen hurried on. The rain continued to intensify, accompanied by strong winds, and it was clear to Helen that she needed to find shelter and wait it out. The elderly woman hurried to the porch of the nearest store, seeking shelter from the rain. Some people had already gathered there, waiting for the rain to stop. Cheerful children saw the sudden downpour as another adventure, while frowning adults were frustrated by the delay it caused. Helen's attention was suddenly drawn to a young man standing with his back against the wall. He had bright turquoise eyes, well-defined cheekbones, and wheat-coloured bangs that did not fall onto his forehead. He was a handsome young man, likely attracting the attention of many girls. He reminded Helen so much of Mike, a guy she had known for just 2 days in her life, almost 4 decades ago. Yet she vividly remembered every feature of his face, his scent, and the words he used to say to her. Mike, if he were still alive, would have long forgotten their casual acquaintance. He had many other admirers, and he wasn't aware of the role he played in Helen's life. She was born into a family of a tractor driver and a milkmaid. At just 2 years old, she became the eldest child, with another daughter named Angela following. Despite their modest lifestyle, the family lived decently, without starvation or tattered clothes. Helen's parents worked hard, so she and Angela learned early on to take care of the household. Helen reflected on modern children who, in her opinion, were overprotected by their parents. She and her sister were already washing floors and cooking meals at the age of 6 or 7. They took care of the yard and livestock, completed their homework and laundry without reminders. Despite their responsibilities, the girls still had plenty of spare time. After finishing their tasks and homework, they would happily join their friends outside. All their peers lived similarly, balancing their time between home, school and playing with friends. Helen and Angela were always supportive of each other, maintaining a strong bond. Unlike her younger sister Angela, Helen didn't excel in school. Angela effortlessly grasped everything, be it complex formulas or history. It seemed like everything naturally clicked in her younger sister's mind. For Helen, schooling felt like an insurmountable challenge throughout her studies. She tried her best, always completing her homework and never slacking off, but she couldn't measure up to Angela, and their parents took immense pride in their youngest daughter. "Maybe at least someone from our family will pursue higher education," their mother dreamt. "You'll succeed in life, daughter. You have a sharp mind," their father reasoned. "It would be foolish to miss such an opportunity. Give it your all, and we'll support you." Helen was proud of her sister too, but her parents' words hurt her a little. Did that mean her parents didn't count on her? Did they not expect anything good from her? Was all hope only placed on Angela? Angela was a good girl, and she always helped Helen with her lessons whenever she faced an unsolvable task. Time passed and the sisters grew up. Helen went to study in the city. She chose a practical field, sewing. She had always been skilled with her hands and knew she would make a good tailor. "Great choice." Her parents approved of her decision. "That's a decent speciality. You won't be left without a means to earn a living. We're wishing you success." After graduating, Helen decided to stay in the city. She found a job at a tailor shop, rented an apartment nearby, and started taking on freelance sewing work. Although the pay at the tailor shop wasn't substantial, the additional part-time work was helpful. Whether it was altering a dress, tailoring a coat, or sewing tablecloths and curtains, Helen always had work and money. Meanwhile, Angela pursued a law degree at the university. Oh, how their parents' eyes gleamed with pride when they spoke about her to acquaintances. They were glad about their eldest daughter, Helen, who was hard-working and skilled, but their younger daughter was the one they truly beamed with pride for. Who could blame them? Angela was intelligent, beautiful, and studying at the university. Helen genuinely felt happy for her sister. She accepted that it wasn't her destiny to excel in academics, but she knew her hands were gifted, and everyone acknowledged that. Time flew by. Helen's friends got married and started families, but things just didn't fall into place for her. The men who liked her did not attract her, and the men she liked preferred other women. It was a paradox. Whenever she heard that a friend or former classmate was getting married, Helen felt worried and anxious. Her parents added fuel to the fire. Every time she visited them, they bombarded her with questions about marriage, having children and settling down. Helen felt almost desperate. She started viewing every guy around her as a potential spouse, evaluating them solely from that perspective. Unsurprisingly, this obsession didn't go unnoticed and drove men away. And then there was a dance party in the city park. Helen went there with her girlfriends. She didn't particularly enjoy dancing, as the loud music always gave her a headache, but she hoped to meet someone at the dance. Helen wanted the same: love, a husband, a child, and simple human happiness. She dressed up her best dress that highlighted her good legs, curled her hair, applied makeup to her lashes and lips, and, satisfied with the result, she left the house. Helen didn't have high expectations, as she had attended dances once every 2 or 3 months, without any luck. But that evening turned out to be entirely different. Unusual, magical, and amazing. Mike initially noticed one of Helen's friends, the blue-eyed beauty Kate, and approached them to introduce himself. While he seemed to address everyone, his eyes were fixed on Kate. Helen realized she had fallen in love when she saw the stranger's turquoise eyes. They looked cheerful and mischievous, with a slightly sly squint. And his smile, it was enough to drive her crazy. Mike was a witty and funny conversationalist, confident and unembarrassed, unlike many other guys. Helen would have given a lot for Mike to show the same interest in her as her friend. But Mike invited Kate to dance. Not her. Helen watched them with envy from around the corner. She saw how the guy tried to hold Kate tighter than was socially acceptable. His hands kept slipping below her waist, making Kate uncomfortable. After another dance, she slipped out for the fresh air, and Helen understood that her friend was just scared of Mike's advances, so she found an excuse to leave as well. Mike hurried after Kate, but Helen intercepted him. Just then, slow music started playing. "Shall we dance?" Helen smiled at him, making a desperate and bold move. She had never behaved like this before, but it felt as if she was being guided. She felt relaxed and confident, with no doubt that Mike would agree to dance with her, and he did. For a moment the guy looked at Helen confused, as if trying to remember who she was. Of course, when they first met, Mike only had eyes for Kate, but the second time he smiled radiantly at Helen. Her heart raced and her palms immediately sweated as he extended his hand to her. During their dance, Helen melted in his warm embrace. When the music stopped, he slightly kissed her. It wasn't Helen's first kiss, but it was the first time she had such a reaction. She felt dizzy, and her eyes darkened. She wanted Mike to hold her like this for the rest of her life. She didn't care that he was kissing and hugging her in front of everyone. Let them look, let them be jealous. She didn't care what they thought. "Shall we go for a walk?" Mike suggested it in a hoarse voice. Helen eagerly agreed. She also wanted to be alone with him. They wandered through the night city, hand in hand. Mike talked about himself and asked Helen questions about her life. When he learned that she lived alone, he suggested going to her place. Helen agreed without hesitation. Throughout the evening and night, Helen had been imagining herself and Mike as a married couple, deeply in love and planning to spend their lives together. She enjoyed being near him and taking care of him. Mike was already asleep, and Helen lay in bed looking at the ceiling and relishing in the feeling. The warmth of her loved one, his peaceful breathing, and the silence and tranquility. Helen was completely in love. She had never experienced such strong feelings before, and she didn't know she was capable of feeling this way. The young woman didn't know much about Mike. He mentioned that he lived in another city, but didn't specify which one. He came here to visit a friend, someone he served in the army with. This friend recently got married, and Mike was his best man. Helen believed that they had met each other for a reason, and now Mike wouldn't go anywhere, and if he did leave, he would probably take her with him. In the morning, Helen woke up to the sounds in the kitchen. The scent of scrambled eggs filled the air. She stretched in bed and smiled, remembering the events of the previous evening. It was Mike preparing breakfast for her. How wonderful and romantic. Before meeting her lover, Helen looked into the bathroom, washed her face and smoothed her hair. She applied a touch of lipstick and pinched her cheeks, adding a subtle blush. She wanted to appear in all her glory before Mike. Indeed, he had cooked scrambled eggs. "Good morning." The man smiled when Helen entered the kitchen. "I've been acting here, like at my place, for a bit. Is that okay? I was just hungry." "That's even better," Helen said, radiantly smiling. "So romantic." "Let me woo you, then." With these words, Mike took out a plate, deftly seized a piece of scrambled eggs on it, and sprinkled it with greens on top. Helen, mesmerized, followed his every movement. Her heart beat joyfully in her chest. At last she had met her man. And what a man! Handsome, intelligent, attentive, caring. The young people ate breakfast in silence. Mike was obviously thinking about something, and Helen did not want to distract him. "Thank you for the evening." The man finally broke the silence. "But now I have to go. I have to stop by my friend's place, pack my things, and go to the train station. The train will be here soon." Helen felt as if she had been hit on the head with a sandbag. How could this be? Is he already leaving? What about her? They were so happy together. "Are you really leaving town today?" "Yes, didn't I tell you?" Mike was surprised, and then suddenly smiled with his charming smile. Yeah, well, we didn't really have much time to talk yesterday. I thought you would stay. I would love to. You're great, really, but the train's in 3 hours and I've got plenty of things to do. Will we meet again? Helen fought hard against the tears welling up in her eyes. She had already realized everything, guessed it all from Mike's looks and his tone. Everything turned out to be her illusion. Their feelings, sparks. Mike had not planned anything serious from the very beginning. Helen herself invented an unearthly love and a fateful chance meeting. And for him, she was just another girl for a good time, pleasant and non-committal. Helen did not make a scene. She took herself in hand and put on an indifferent look. She didn't want Mike to think that she considered him more than a casual acquaintance for the evening. She didn't want to appear pathetic in his eyes. However, Mike still seemed to notice something. "Are you upset?" he asked, and something like guilt seemed to flicker in his eyes. No, Helen couldn't be angry with him. He hadn't promised her anything, nor had he lied to her. Now, there was a kind of genuine concern for her. "A little," the girl smiled. "I thought we had at least another evening to spend together." Mike hugged her and gave her a kiss on top of the head. "If I had another day, I'd spend it with you. That's for sure. But I've got to go. It was a pleasure to meet you." Mike went away. Time passed. Life returned to its normal course. Helen worked, met with friends, read, watched TV, and went to the movies. She visited her parents. In general, she led a familiar life. However, she often remembered Mike. She imagined how their relationship might have turned out. And she also dreamed. She dreamed that one day he would drop everything he was doing and rush to her to confess that he missed her, loved her, couldn't live without her. Of course, Helen realized that this would never happen. But the sweet dreams made her feel pleasant and light-hearted, and she didn't deny herself in them. A month and a half later from that memorable night, Helen suddenly realized that she was expecting a child. One of her co-workers was eating a fish for lunch, and the smell coming from her plate made Helen feel sick. Yes, so much so that her vision darkened. At first, Helen tried to find an explanation for her situation. Her cycle was probably disrupted by this nervous situation. After all, she had a hard time breaking up with Mike. Nausea was also probably from nerves. Or it was the results of the diet. But a few more weeks passed, and it became impossible to ignore the symptoms. Helen went to see a doctor who confirmed her fears. Pregnancy is in its 3rd month. Helen was in shock at the news. However, after suffering for several days in a row, Helen could accept the situation. She would try her best to give the baby a good childhood. She had a good profession, and her parents would definitely help her if anything happened. They were loving and reliable, so the baby would be fine. After that, Helen finally felt inner calm and began to enjoy life. At the same time, Angela got a degree. Not only that, but she was also invited to work abroad in a large company. This was incredible in Helen's eyes. Her little sister had reached such heights. A dizzying career, interesting work. Recognition awaited her, while Helen would soon become a single mother. Her parents were only talking about their youngest daughter's upcoming departure. They were proud of Angela again, and they had no idea that soon their eldest daughter would make them happy by becoming a single mother without a partner. Against the backdrop of her sister's success, Helen's own life seemed like a complete failure. Soon Angela moved away. She called her parents and sister occasionally and sent letters with enclosed pictures. Helen saw that her sister had changed. There was a hardness in her face that made her even more beautiful and attractive. A beauty, a clever girl, a dream. And Helen had her own life. A few months had passed, and now it was impossible to hide the pregnancy. Everyone at work guessed, and her boss began to criticize Helen's work in every possible way, and constantly hinted that he would not be satisfied with her work because a single mother would constantly take sick leave. Who would do her work then? All this disturbed Helen. She realized that she was going to be fired. Yes, pregnant employees are protected by the laws, but there are always loopholes to be found. And so the boss found one. One day, he simply closed the atelier, making it cease to exist. As a result, all the female employees lost their jobs. But it was only for one day, because the firm was bankrupt only on paper. In reality, it continued to operate without interruption. The very next day, the boss rehired the dressmakers, except for Helen and some other women with small children. They were of no use to the boss. Helen was left without a job and means of subsistence. She didn't even have money to pay the rent. She had nowhere to go, so Helen had to return to her parents in the village and confess everything to them. Mother and father, of course, were surprised to hear their daughter's story, but they were not particularly upset. On the contrary, they seemed reassured. "Don't worry, we'll get through this," the father reassured, stroking Helen's head like a little girl. "We won't lose, not this time." "Everything will be fine," echoed the mother. "You'll give birth to a baby, and we'll help you raise it. Children are happiness." The parents didn't seem bothered by the upcoming difficulties or the inevitable gossip from the neighbours, and Helen understood why. They had a successful younger daughter. Even Helen's life mistakes paled in comparison to Angela's achievements. On one hand, it made life easier for Helen. On the other hand, it made her feel even more significant and foolish. It was frustrating, painful, but too familiar. Jeremy, Helen's son, was born on his due date. As a new mother, Helen spent hours gazing at his red, wrinkled face, hoping to see a semblance to Mike, his father. She wished for her baby to inherit his father's handsome, charming, and charismatic traits. However, Jeremy did not have the same deep turquoise eyes or an open smile that formed dimples in his cheeks. He was just a typical boy, short, thin, with black hair, resembling his grandfather. Nevertheless, Helen adored Jeremy. The moment she saw her baby, she realized that her actions and her life would be solely for his sake. During Jeremy's infancy, Helen received support from her parents. It was necessary, as the state payments were minimal, and she had no husband or savings. But as soon as the opportunity arose, she took a job as an auxiliary worker in a cowshed. Jeremy was still too young for kindergarten, so he stayed with his grandparents, who adored him. Helen worked hard because she wanted her baby to have the best toys, beautiful clothes, and the chance to travel. The work in the cowshed was physically demanding, requiring her to work in 2 shifts to earn a decent wage. With the money she earned, Helen started taking Jeremy to the city every weekend. They would visit cafes, go on rides, watch movies, and of course, visit toy stores. Helen often allowed her son to choose whatever he wanted, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. She worked tirelessly to see the happy gleam in her son's eyes. Sometimes Helen's father would shake his head and say, "You spoil him. You shouldn't do that. You've completely forgotten about yourself, and everything you care for is Jeremy." "But you're still young." Helen would shrug and reply, "I don't need anything. The main thing is for my son to be happy." "It's your time for your son to learn to work. He can't wash his plate or clean his room. You and your grandmother do everything for him. You're raising a spoiled child. It's not good for a man." Helen's mother would quickly come to Helen's defense, saying, "He will have plenty of time to work in due time. Let him enjoy his childhood." The elderly man had no choice but to give up. However, decades later, Helen would realize how right he was. Blinded by love for her son, she failed to notice many things, but the consequences of her actions were waiting for her. Jeremy, although intelligent, was a lazy boy. At first, he quickly grasped everything at school and excelled without much effort. Helen had hoped that he would take after Angela, who held a prominent position and published in professional magazines. However, no one can rely solely on intelligence and memory throughout their school years. It was time for Jeremy to work harder, to learn, to understand complex formulas, and to put in effort. But Jeremy had no interest in any of that. Problems started to arise: low grades, frequent absences, and a general unwillingness to attend school. Jeremy argued that in today's world, a person could get a good job without education. It broke Helen's heart to see her son waste his abilities and not make use of his talents. The grandfather tried to discipline his grandson, however it was too late. For Jeremy there was no more authorities. He got involved with a bad crowd, teenagers from less prosperous families. Helen tried to talk to her son, to bring him back on the right path, but her efforts were in vain. Jeremy believed he knew better, and he often quarrelled with his mother. "What can you teach me? You live impoverished, you don't have a proper education, and you spend your days shoveling manure on the farm for pennies. I don't want to live like you, so you're not a decent example of life example." Helen had nothing to say to her son. She could only hope that he would grow up and wise up. The year in which Jeremy was to finish school brought Helen many losses. First, immediately after the new year, his father died. He had long been coughing strangely and had difficulty breathing, but attributed it to a lifetime of smoking. It turned out to be his heart. He had a heart attack in the morning, and Helen couldn't even get him to the hospital in time. After Jeremy's grandfather's death, he completely lost control. The elderly man had kept him in check a little bit, but now the boy's behaviour became wild. He would disappear at night with new friends, come home drunk, and demand money for entertainment from his mother and grandmother. Jeremy became rude, harsh, and completely distant. Neither persuasion nor threats had any effect on him. Helen, who was still grieving for her father, felt like she was losing her son as well. Only his mother gave her hope with her words that the boy would get through this phase. "He's growing up without a father and it's hard for him, but he'll come around with time. He'll definitely calm down. I've seen many similar cases in my lifetime." And indeed, by the middle of the year, Jeremy had suddenly matured. He finished school, and his grades were pretty good thanks to his mother's efforts, who had given gifts to the teachers and school administration at the end of the year. Jeremy seemed to suddenly appreciate all that his mother and grandmother had done for him, and he even asked them for forgiveness. Helen's heart sang. Her mother was right. Jeremy had changed as he grew up. "I've decided to go to the city and study welding." "Oh, that's a great profession," his mother and grandmother chorused. They would have been happy with any choice Jeremy made. The most important thing was that he realized the importance of education. He would learn, get a profession, and have a stable life. Jeremy left, easily got into the technical school, and started his independent life in a student dormitory. Helen breathed a sigh of relief. Everything seemed to be back to normal, and then another blow came. Her elderly mother fell ill, and soon she was admitted to the hospital with bilateral pneumonia. Helen felt tense, but not overly frightened. Pneumonia was serious, there was no doubt about it, but her mother was under the care of doctors in the hospital. The woman didn't think about the worst, but one morning she received a call from the hospital with terrible news. Her mother had passed away. It happened suddenly during the night. It felt like Helen's world had been shattered. She was left alone in this cruel world, with a difficult life and a difficult teenager. How she wished Mike was by her side now. She still remembered the father of her child with tenderness and love. Helen longed for a reliable shoulder to lean on in this difficult situation, but there was no such person. Angela was far away, and although she would come to say goodbye to her mother, she would soon fly back to her own life, full of events and excitement. And Mike, he probably didn't even remember Helen. She wondered how his life turned out. Surely he was happily married and raising children, not even suspecting that he had another son in need of his attention and care. Time passed, and Helen gradually adjusted to her new life. Her son left to study in the city, and she continued to work 2 shifts to provide for all of Jeremy's needs. The boy needed clothes, food, textbooks, and extra classes. He also needed money for leisure activities. After all, it was his time as a student, and life in the city was expensive. During this period of her life, Peter, a former classmate and now a widower, began to woo Helen. He worked as a driver for the administration. Back in high school, Peter used to chase after Helen with flowers and compliments. It was funny how she remembered him, self-conscious, ridiculous, and somewhat anxious, but also touching. At that time, young Helen dreamt of guys like Mike, heavy, stylish, and smart. Peter, on the other hand, seemed too simple. He was short, puny, and wore glasses. Of course, Helen enjoyed the attention from the boy, boosting her ego, but she never considered anything serious with him. Time passed, and Peter transformed from an ordinary teenager into a good man. He married Beth, a girl 1 grade below Helen. Helen and Beth were childhood friends, not particularly close, but they often went for walks together, socialized, and shared secrets. Peter and Beth's family was exemplary. They were both calm, hard-working, and polite. It was difficult to imagine them raising their voices at each other or their children. They had a son and a daughter, and their house was full of love, prosperity, and abundance. Helen was happy for her childhood friends. Unfortunately, the marital happiness of Peter and Beth was short-lived. Beth, young and seemingly healthy, suddenly fell ill. She grew pale, thin, and weak right before their eyes. Peter took her to hospitals trying to help. They discovered a complex genetic disease, but there was no cure. The doctors could only offer a disappointing prognosis, differing by a few months. Beth couldn't be saved. As a result, Peter was left alone with their 2 children. The whole village supported the inconsolable widower. At first, Helen even cooked dinners for the orphaned family, but then Peter took over the household. He slowly raised his son and daughter, helped them stand on their own 2 feet, and provided them with an education. Both children now worked and lived in the city, but Peter didn't rush to move closer to them. He still had elderly parents to take care of in the village. When Jeremy went off to study, Helen noticed that Peter was increasingly around. He would offer her a ride home from work, engage in conversations about various topics, and help her carry her bags from the store. It seemed like he was always coincidentally crossing her path. Helen enjoyed his pleasant company. They discussed the news, reminisced about their childhoods, and laughed together. One day Peter mustered the courage to have a serious conversation. It was clear that this step was not easy for him. "Helen, you know I've always liked you," he confessed. "Well, when was that?" Helen smiled, not realizing what Peter was getting at. She thought they were just reminiscing about their childhood again. "It was a long time ago," Peter agreed. Then he looked at her seriously and added, "But nothing has changed since then." Helen looked at him questioningly, not knowing what to say. However, the unexpected confession made her feel good. Goosebumps ran down her back, warming her heart. "I've always had a soft spot for you ever since childhood. Since 6th grade. I mustered the courage to confess in high school, but you turned me down. I pretended not to care, but I really suffered. I would secretly admire you, get jealous when other guys were around, and dream that after finishing school I would study, become successful, and come for you in a cool car. Then you wouldn't be able to resist." Helen smiled. The confession seemed naive and sweet. Peter smiled too, reminiscing about his young and ambitious self. "But it didn't work out," he continued. "I couldn't get into university. I wasn't smart enough. I ended up studying to become a driver and returned to the village. Of course, I heard about you from acquaintances who said you were living in the city. They mentioned you had someone, but I never doubted it. You were such a beautiful girl, and you still are." Helen couldn't contain her laughter. Peter, living in the village, mistakenly believed that she had many suitors in the city. Little did he know, Helen suffered from loneliness and was desperately jealous of her married friends. "You have no idea how wrong you were," she exclaimed. "Yes, I was a young fool," Peter grinned. "I thought I had missed my chance. What was I, just an ordinary driver? And you were a princess, a queen, an unattainable ideal. We weren't a match." Back then, Peter felt a deep emotional pain. The girl he had loved since childhood would never be his. It seemed as though there was nothing left to live for. He went about his daily routine, working, eating and spending time with friends. The world appeared dull and meaningless. Then unexpectedly, Peter discovered that his neighbour Beth had feelings for him. The girl, who had transformed from a skinny teenager into a lovely girl, finally caught Peter's attention. With her big clear eyes, thick long hair and slim waist, she had a certain charm. Beth had completed her studies at a pedagogical college in the city and returned to her small hometown. She was now a teacher, working with first graders. One evening, as Peter returned from work, Beth took a decisive step and approached him at the gate. She poured out her feelings, leaving Peter dumbfounded. "I was stunned," Peter recalled with a smile. "It was unexpected, but I also felt sorry for her, as I had been in the same position. I realized how much she hoped for my attention and how important it was to her. I knew that my indifference would crush her. How could I do that to the fragile, love-struck Beth?" They began spending time together, getting to know each other better each day, and soon they realized they were a wonderful couple. "I thought that nothing good would ever happen in my life," Peter said, "and then she pulled me out of my shell and showed me that happiness was still possible. We got married, and then you returned to the village, confused and pregnant. How I wished I could support and encourage you, but it was too late. Beth and I were married and we had children." "Did you still love me then?" Helen asked, surprised. "Of course, and even now, I love you too. But at that time I couldn't express my feelings. I had obligations to Beth and our children. I loved them all. I couldn't betray my family, even for my own happiness." "Were you unhappy?" Helen wondered, deeply moved by Peter's revelation. "I can't say," Peter responded. "Beth was wonderful. I loved her in my own way and took care of her. I was content with her. But towards you, I can't even describe what I felt and still feel." They sat in silence for a while. Peter looked at Helen, waiting for any sign from her. But the woman struggled to understand her own feelings. She was pleased to have someone who loved her so deeply. It warmed her soul. Peter was a loving, devoted, good and reliable man. However, something held Helen back. What about Jeremy? She pondered. How would he feel about this situation? He probably wouldn't approve and would think that his mother had lost her mind in old age. However, the desire to be with someone who cared gradually overwhelmed her. Helen thought about how wonderful it would be if they could live together. Peter would undoubtedly be happy, and the realization that she could bring so much joy to someone else was satisfying. On the whole, that same evening, the former classmates decided to try being a couple. "Well then, I'll take you out tomorrow," Peter concluded with a smile. "My youthful dream will finally come true." "Will it?" Helen nodded, with a hint of hesitation. The next day they went to the city. They strolled through the park, talked, ate in cafes, and even went to the movies. During the film, Peter took Helen's hand and held it for a time until the end of the movie. She didn't object. She enjoyed the feeling of not being alone anymore. A week later, Peter moved in with Helen. He immediately fixed the leaking faucet and tightened the hinges on all the interior doors. Finally, they no longer creaked. Helen began cooking again. When she was alone, she rarely bothered herself with it, but now that Peter was with her, she delighted in preparing delicious meals for him. Helen had a burning question in her mind. How would Jeremy react to all the changes in her life? She didn't know yet. Her son rarely visited her, and their communication was mainly limited to phone calls. So Helen kept the recent changes in her life a secret from Jeremy. As for Peter, he had already told his son and daughter about Helen, and the woman noticed that they were happy for their father. Years went by, and Helen never found the courage to have a serious conversation with Jeremy. It was easy for her to hide the details of her personal life, as her son showed little interest in her affairs. He usually called just to ask for money, but one day Jeremy surprised her by showing up at her doorstep. Helen greeted him with a mix of joy and confusion. "Hello," she said, pleased, yet slightly taken aback. Peter was still at work, but his belongings were scattered around the house, making it obvious that someone else was now living here. "Hello," Jeremy responded gloomily. He didn't look well, slouched, pale and anxious. "I need money." Helen immediately sensed that something serious had happened. "What's going on?" she asked, her heart pounding. "Is it something related to your studies?" "I haven't been studying for a while," Jeremy muttered under his breath. "Why?" "Just because," the son replied rudely. "I got expelled for skipping classes. I've been working hard to make ends meet." "But I've been sending you the majority of my salary every month," Helen reminded him. "That's nothing in the city," Jeremy sighed. "I couldn't make ends meet, so I did what I had to do. My friends' parents are well off. They have cars and apartments, and they give their kids money for entertainment. But what about me? I feel like a pauper all the time. Do you think that's pleasant?" Helen was deeply hurt by her son's words. She had dedicated her whole life to providing the best for him, wanting him to have every advantage, and now he thought he was unhappy. It seemed that she had failed in her duty as a parent. "So what's the problem?" Helen asked. "I've gotten into debt," Jeremy began to explain. "I wanted to start a business to make some money, but it backfired, and now I owe a lot. They're threatening me. I have no idea how to get out of this situation. That's why I came to you for help." "Son, you know I don't have anything," Helen said. "What do you mean you don't have anything?" Jeremy was surprised. "What about this house? Do you really want us to sell the house?" "Well, what's the alternative, Mum? I'll use the money to pay off my debts, rent an apartment, and we can live together in the city. Why not? Besides, you can get a job at the sewing factory in the city. Grandma told me you used to be a dressmaker. We could live together in the city. It'll be great, won't it?" Helen couldn't agree with her son's proposal. A couple of years ago, she would have gladly supported Jeremy's idea. Living alone in an empty house had become unbearable. But now she had Peter. They were good together, and it was comforting to have a loving and understanding person by her side. So, what should she do? Jeremy finally noticed the men's belongings in the house. Peter's jacket hung on the wall. His sneakers stood near the front door. "What's all this?" Jeremy asked, looking at his mother in astonishment. "Do you have someone else here?" "I've been meaning to tell you for a while, but yes, I'm not alone anymore." "I see." The son shook his head and sighed sadly. "Well, of course, you have no son to worry about anymore, right?" "You know that's not true," Helen softly objected. She could see that Jeremy was in a state of depression. He was facing problems and needed help, and as his mother, she was going to lend him a helping hand in this difficult moment. "Son, I'll do whatever you say." And Helen did exactly that. She sold the house and gave most of the proceeds to her son. With the remaining money, she bought a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. Peter offered various options and even wanted to give Jeremy his savings. Although it was far less than what Jeremy needed, it was still a considerable amount. But Helen refused. She didn't want Peter to solve their problems. Besides, he had his own children to take care of. It would be despicable to take advantage of him in such a situation. "Then stay with me," Peter suggested. Helen had already packed her things at that time, and the suitcases were in the hallway, waiting for tomorrow morning. Jeremy had ordered a cab for his mother by 10 o'clock. "You know I can't," Helen whispered. "I know, but I don't understand. You gave him money and bought a place to live. But why would you want to be there yourself? Stay with me. I've got a big house with plenty of room. You know. We had a good time together, didn't we?" "Yes, I was happy with you," agreed Helen. For these few years that she had lived with Peter, the woman got used to warmth, care, acceptance. They often walked together in the evenings and discussed something. Peter looked at Helen with loving eyes, and she felt happy. But now everything was different. Helen saw that her son was not well, too anxious, too restless. Something bad was clearly going on in his life. Yes, Jeremy was an adult, and Peter was partly right when he said that he should deal with his own problems. But when Helen was in a difficult situation, she didn't deal with her problems on her own. Her parents helped her a lot. Peter tried to convince Helen that there was a huge difference between a young single woman with a child in her arms and a grown man, to whom his mother gave money from the sale of the house. But Helen couldn't agree with him. It was good for him to talk so calm, because his son and a daughter were working at good jobs and had families. There was no telling how Peter would have acted if one of his children had gotten into a situation like Jeremy's. And also, Helen was afraid of losing her last home. Now that she did not have the house in which her childhood had passed, the woman began to worry from old age. It would not be long before she would be elderly and perhaps helpless. How would she live without her own corner? Anyway, she had to find out what was going on in his life. Maybe it's time to save her son. He won't admit it himself, but when they start living together, Helen will understand everything. She'll see for herself. She can't leave her only child alone with his problems and troubles. "Well, why are you so worried?" Helen smiled at Peter, but the smile came out sad. The woman understood that even without a mirror. "I'm not moving to the moon or even to another continent. The city is near. Distance is not a hindrance to real feelings. We'll meet. We'll communicate." "We will, of course," Peter sighed, "but you realize it's not the same thing." "What can you do? Life happens that way." Helen moved to the city and enthusiastically took up the arrangement of the new dwelling. There was only one bedroom in the apartment. It went, of course, to Jeremy. Helen settled down in the living room. Peter often visited her at first. They walked along the embankment as before and sat in cafes. With him, Helen felt invaluable, important and loved. Peter kept asking her to move in with him, but Helen could not leave her son now. After living with him for a while, the woman realized that Jeremy had a serious drinking problem. He drank a lot, coming home only in the morning. His mother lay awake worrying. What if someone beat him up, or he was hit by a car, or even taken by the police? Meanwhile, Jeremy drank more and more, and he degraded literally before her eyes. He became stupid, aggressive, and helpless. Helen blamed herself, and who else could she blame? It was her fault that Jeremy's childhood had passed without a father, and besides, maybe Mike, Jeremy's father, was a drunkard, and Helen heard that addiction to hot drinks was often passed on by genes. And now Jeremy was suffering because of his careless mother. Helen tried to make her son's existence as easy as she could, feeding him on her own money, and generally becoming a servant for Jeremy. He did nothing at all around the house. He only demanded things. Before the man began to live with his mother, he was still trying to work, but now he was completely relaxed. Indeed, why bother, if all the same he will not stay hungry? Mother bought groceries, and cooked lunches and dinners for several dishes. So Jeremy didn't bother himself with constant work, and after some time he began demanding money from his mother whenever he didn't have enough for a drink. Feeling sorry for her son, Helen initially gave him money, but then she realized what he was spending it on and stopped. However, sometimes Jeremy still managed to take money from her purse, and other times he resorted to threats and rudeness. Helen felt unhappy and confused. Life with her own son had turned into a nightmare. Jeremy would yell at her, talk back to her, and take her money. Helen's only solace was going for walks with Peter. He would visit her in the city whenever possible. She didn't share the details of her life with him because it was embarrassing and difficult. She couldn't confide in anyone about her misfortune. In front of others, Helen put on a mask of serenity. One day, Peter shared some news with Helen that deeply pained her. "I'm moving soon," he said, gazing into the distance. "And, to my great regret, we won't be able to see each other often." Helen shrieked. "Where to?" Peter was the only person who made her feel better, and now it turned out that their meetings were coming to an end. "To the sea," he replied. "I have lung problems, and the doctor advised me to change the climate. My son and his family are moving with me. My daughter is still considering it. That's the plan." "I will miss you very much," Helen said sadly, trying to hold back the tears. "Helen, I beg you, come with me. You helped your son when he was in a difficult situation. Now he'll find his own way. And he's not a little boy anymore. And what about you? You deserve some happiness. We'll live by the sea. Think about it." But Helen knew she couldn't leave and abandon her son. Peter didn't know anything about Jeremy's addiction. How could she enjoy the sea, sun, and company of Peter, knowing that her son was suffering alone in a distant city? Peter left, and Helen struggled with his absence. They called and texted each other, but it wasn't the same. Peter sent photos of beautiful landscapes and continued to invite Helen to join him, but she felt she had to be there for her son. Several more years passed. Jeremy continued to drink and refused treatment. He started bringing his drunk friends home, which was even harder for Helen than waiting up at night for him. These people, rough-looking women and degraded men, would laugh loudly in Jeremy's room, drink, swear, and sometimes even fight. When Helen tried to reason with her son, he snapped at her. Then Deborah, Jeremy's girlfriend, came into their lives, and unfortunately, there was no hope that she would have a positive influence on Jeremy. Deborah herself had a penchant for trouble, and if Jeremy typically didn't bother his mother, except when he needed money, Deborah would often confront and argue with her. In the end, Deborah turned Jeremy against his mother. He now believed that she wanted to cause problems between him and Deborah, and that she generally hated his girlfriend. Scolding, quarrels, and scandals became a daily occurrence for Helen. Thoughts of her sad life were swirling around in Helen's head, and meanwhile the rain had subsided. Helen took advantage of the break to head towards her home. This time she hurried, in case it started raining again. When she got to her floor by foot, as there had never been an elevator in this old apartment building, the elderly woman stood at the door like a stumbling block. Her suitcases, the same ones with which she had moved here from the village, were on the landing. Helen opened one of them. There were her things lying in it. It was strange. The elderly woman tried to open the door with her key, but it didn't work. Helen knocked loudly, since the doorbell hadn't worked for a long time. The door swung open, revealing Deborah standing on the threshold. She looked happy, with a smile on her face. "What does all this mean?" Helen asked. "You're just leaving. "You old hag," Deborah announced it in a subdued voice. "This is my apartment. Why would I leave?" "It's not yours. It's Jeremy's. It's registered under his name. I saw the papers myself the other day. You're nobody here, so get out." After these words, Jeremy's head appeared from behind Deborah. "Yes, Mum, that's what we've decided. You need to leave. You haven't given us a normal life. You keep interfering all the time, meddling in things with your advice. You even want to cause a rift between Deborah and me. Therefore, it's better for us to live separately." "What will you live on?" Helen asked calmly. She had long realized that her son didn't have any warm feelings for her, but he needed her, at least as a source of funding. "You know nothing," Deborah smirked. "I'm expecting a baby. I'm due in a couple of months. I'll receive my maternity pay, and then I'll receive monthly payments for the baby. So, we'll be fine." Helen glanced at her figure. Yes, her belly was noticeable under the soiled sweater. But Deborah had never been particularly slender, so Helen didn't notice anything before. Poor baby. How will Deborah and Jeremy raise him? And will the baby even survive? The news about the child overshadowed the fact that she was being kicked out of her own home. She felt unbearably sorry for this unborn baby, her grandson or granddaughter. At the same time, Helen realized that she couldn't save the baby or make his life even the slightest bit easier. She couldn't even sort out her own fate. "So, get out of here!" Deborah said it arrogantly and smiled triumphantly again. "But son, where am I supposed to go?" Helen turned to Jeremy. "Do you want me to live on the street?" "You have a suitor in the village. Go to him." Jeremy waved her away carelessly. "You have somewhere to go. Don't pretend to be poor or helpless." Of course, Jeremy didn't know that Peter had moved 1,000 miles away from here. "And you also have a rich sister. She won't leave you behind," Deborah added and slammed the door. Helen picked up her suitcases and went outside. What should she do? She didn't have a single thought in her head about where to go. Peter was far away, and her sister Angela was even farther away. Nobody needed her. She was lonely, abandoned, and now homeless. And she was ashamed to tell people that her own son, for whom she had only lived, had kicked her out of the house. Helen walked for a long time. The rain had stopped, but the icy wind continued to blow, burning her cheeks and making her eyes water. It was rapidly getting darker, and there were hardly any people on the streets. Finally, Helen couldn't walk any longer. She placed her suitcases near an empty bus stop, sat on them, and let the tears flow. They streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't even bother to wipe her face. She cried for her unfulfilled hopes for her son. She wept for Jeremy's addiction and the sad fate of her unborn grandchild. And, of course, she wept for her unclear future. "Hi, is something wrong?" A pleasant young girl's voice came from somewhere behind her. Helen turned around sharply. A tall, thin young woman was looking at her. She wore tight jeans, sneakers, and a deep hooded sweatshirt. Her eyes were attentive and sympathetic. Next to the stranger, a funny little pug was visibly worried. He whined in an amusing manner and seemed to gaze sympathetically at Helen. Its happy face looked so comical that the elderly woman couldn't help but smile through her tears. Valerie was born into a family of students. She had no memory of her parents. She saw their photos and listened to stories from relatives and their friends. That's how the image of her mother and father was woven into her mind. They were cheerful, energetic, hard-working, a little naive, and deeply in love with each other and with their child. The tragedy occurred at a construction site. Valerie's mother and father, trying to earn some extra money after their studies, were looking for side jobs. That time they managed to find work with a private company that was building a sports complex in the city centre. The young couple, along with a couple of other students, were painting the walls when something went wrong. Either the cable broke or the platform failed. In any case, all four of them fell from a height directly onto the concrete floor. The owner of the construction site managed to escape the consequences. The students were working for him unofficially. He made it appear as if the young people had sneaked onto his construction site to take extreme pictures or something of the sort. After the funeral, Aunt Laura showed up. The woman lived in the village, raising her 3 children alone. They were not poor, but their family couldn't be called wealthy either. Taking in an orphaned niece was a burden for Aunt Laura, but she couldn't abandon her brother's child and send the girl to an orphanage. The neighbours would scold her and remember it for the rest of her life, and of course her conscience would torment her as well. That's how Valerie ended up in Aunt Laura's family. At first glance, the girl's childhood seemed ordinary. Valerie helped her aunt with household chores, played outside with friends and went to school. But there were no birthday parties with many friends and a cake with candles, no nice dresses or trips to amusement parks. But that wasn't the only thing. Valerie missed the simple warmth, hugs, affectionate words and support so much. Aunt Laura was not strict or angry, but she was in no rush to surround her niece with love and care. Her own children were a different matter. Aunt Laura treated them quite differently, stroking their heads, hugging them, and finding tender words for them. But Valerie, she always felt like a stranger to her aunt, and as she grew older, she realized that she was a burden to Aunt Laura. Growing up with the realization of her own insignificance was difficult. The girl dreamed of growing up and having her own family, where she would be truly loved and appreciated. Valerie always spent a lot of time studying. At first, she enjoyed learning new things, and it turned out that she was excellent at it. She was an excellent student throughout all the years. Secondly, Valerie understood perfectly well that education was her only chance for a better life. The girl wanted to leave the village, settle in the city, and travel the world. For all of this, she needed money, so she worked hard. After finishing school, Valerie went to university to become an interpreter. She was given a dormitory, and her independent life began. Finally, she was not a burden to anyone. Valerie didn't pay much attention to boys in her youth. She had firmly decided for herself, career first, then everything else. But in her final year of study, the girl accidentally met Aaron. He was 8 years older than her, self-established, self-confident, handsome, and intelligent. The man had come to the university to find intelligent interpreters for his own travel agency. Aaron opened the door, took a step into the hall, and crashed into Valerie, who was passing by. The man immediately caught the girl, preventing her from falling, and began to apologize. Valerie assured him with a smile that she was fine. She was amused by the man's behavior. He acted as if he hadn't accidentally bumped into her shoulder, but he had nearly hit her with a car. And then, like a scene from a soap opera, their eyes met, and Valerie's breath caught. Aaron obviously felt something too. A spark passed between the young couple. They talked a little and exchanged phone numbers, of course. In the evening, Aaron picked up Valerie and they went for a walk around the city. The girl herself chose this format for their first date. Soon, relations between them became close and very serious. The girl moved into his spacious apartment in the centre of the city. At first, the girl was frightened and confused by the fact that her partner was so wealthy. He had his own travel agency, a fancy car, and an expensive apartment. And who was she? An orphan from a village. But Aaron was not bothered by any of this. He looked at Valerie with admiration in his eyes and showered her with gifts and compliments. The girl saw that her mere presence made him happy, and she allowed herself to be happy without any worries. After a while, Valerie realized that she was expecting a child. It was unexpected and happened too quickly. Aaron was genuinely happy. His business was doing well, his wealth was growing, and his business was expanding. "Children are happiness," smiled the man, gently stroking Valerie's still flat belly. Valerie thought that after sharing the news of her pregnancy, Aaron would finally propose to her. But he did not rush to take her to the registry office. When she asked him directly about legalizing their relationship, Aaron sincerely expressed surprise. "Why do we need all this fuss?" "Well, a child should have a complete family, a mother and a father." "Oh, this! I will legally acknowledge the child, don't doubt that. I consider marriage is just a formality. You know, I was previously married, and the relationship soured right after we got married. There was so much trouble with document reissuance and so on, so I am against such formalities." His favourite statement bruised Valerie, but she managed to accept Aaron's point of view. After all, did a stamp in the passport really matter? The most important thing was that they loved each other. Eva was born on time, which made Valerie the happiest person on earth. The young mother couldn't take her eyes off her daughter and couldn't understand how they had been blessed with such a miracle. Aaron was not a very attentive father. Even since the baby was born, he has somehow become distant. But Valerie, blinded by the new happiness of motherhood, didn't notice. One day, when Eva was just 2 years old, Aaron announced that he was leaving. "I'm leaving the apartment to my daughter. I will support her for life and maintain a relationship with the child too. But I can no longer live with you. I'm sorry. I fell out of love. I met someone else. It happens." Aaron left, leaving Valerie in disarray. She felt like half of her heart had been ripped out of her chest. She loved Aaron so much and had hoped that everything would be fine. But now she had to adapt to a new reality. First, she needed to find a job. Valerie had given birth to her daughter right after finishing university and hadn't had the opportunity to find work. Now, with a small child in her arms and no work experience, who would hire her? Especially since she had no one who could take care of Eva while she was at work. Of course, she could send her child to daycare, but Eva would often get sick there, and employers are unlikely to appreciate an employee who frequently takes sick leave. The situation seemed hopeless. On that November evening, Valerie pondered her future, trying to figure out how she could find work. They didn't have enough money to live on, and she didn't want to ask Aaron for more. He had already left them an entire apartment and provided money for their daughter's support. At that moment, the pug that Aaron had given Valerie before their daughter was born whimpered. The dog asked to go outside. "What a bad time! It's dark and cold, and there are puddles all around. It had just rained. But what to do? The dog can't wait." Eva was already asleep in her room. She would wake up only in the morning, so Valerie could take the dog for a walk. The young woman quickly dressed, attached a leash to the pug's collar and went out into the dank November evening. From afar, Valerie noticed an old woman sitting on her suitcases near the bus stop, and she couldn't believe her eyes. It was a strange sight. She approached, looked closely, and realized that the elderly woman was quietly crying, not even noticing that her face was already wet with tears. Valerie's heart squeezed with pity for the stranger, who was obviously in big trouble. "What's wrong with you? Do you need help?" After hearing Helen's story, Valerie was horrified. She had dreamed so much about her parents being near her. Therefore, she couldn't understand how Jeremy could do that to his mother. His own mother. Without hesitation, Valerie provided a suggestion that came out of her mouth before she had time to think it over. "Come to my place right now, otherwise you'll have a cold. You can't stay outside." A year had passed since that meeting. Helen stayed with Valerie. On that cold, dark evening, over a cup of hot tea, a decision was made that suited both participants in the unusual story. Helen now looked after the house and was happy to babysit Eva, who considered the elderly woman her new grandmother. Valerie calmly went to work, knowing that her little girl was in safe and loving hands. Finally, Valerie had someone who truly loved and cared for her. From Helen, she received the maternal warmth that she had lacked all her life. One day, Jeremy showed up. Somehow, he found out where his mother lived. He demanded that Helen return home, appealing to her sense of family. "Are strangers more important to you than your own son?" "It happens," Helen said, shaking her head. "Now, I know it for sure. Sometimes strangers are closer than relatives. And Valerie and I are not strangers now." Jeremy threw Deborah out. Their child was never born. Deborah, being pregnant, was not willing to give up her bad habits, and naturally, her body couldn't handle it. So, Jeremy crawled back to his mother. He needed her money once again. The man still didn't want to work. But this time Helen was firm. No. Peter was right. Her son was a grown man. She had done more for him than she should have. Let him handle his life from now on. After that, overcoming herself, Helen could eventually tell Peter the truth about her son. She immediately felt better, and Peter finally understood her. He came to Helen, met Valerie and Eva. The four of them quickly found common ground. Eva started calling Peter grandfather. He didn't object. On the contrary, it was obvious that he enjoyed it. "I invite all three of you to visit me this summer," Peter said before he left. "No refusal will be accepted." "No refusal was planned," Helen smiled. Peter left. Valerie and Helen were making plans for a wonderful vacation by the sea. Peter and his whole family were waiting for them. It would be a wonderful vacation. And, who knows, maybe they would move to the seacoast. During the vacation, they would see how things went. Valerie would try to find a job, and they would take a vacation and get to know each other.
"And whose are these? Whose kids are these?" whispered one elderly woman to another, sitting on a bench late at night. The last days of summer were coming to an end. The sun was setting behind the horizon. Birds were chirping, and music could be heard in the distance, possibly from a cafe. And here, on a bench under a shabby 5-story building, were sitting 2 elderly women, the main gossips of this block. They always smiled and said hello, but behind each other's backs they often gossiped and said nasty things about everyone. "So that's Casey Kramer. She has 4 kids. Did you hear that they are all from different men? Young people are so reckless nowadays," said one of them. "Nah, Casey's married, and she has a child with her husband, I think. Well, I don't know for sure, of course. And then she took in 3 more kids when her friend died in an accident."
"Really?" the other neighbour gasped.
"Yeah, she felt sorry for the kids and took them in. Her apartment is fairly big, but with 4 kids, it's still cramped. And the oldest one is graduating from school this year. He's going to college." "Which one is hers?"
"The youngest one. I know her friend was older than Casey."
"All right, be quiet, she's coming."
At that moment, Casey was already close enough, and of course, she heard everything. Should I say that it's none of their business? Although, why waste time and energy on it? Casey thought, and she greeted the elderly women with a gentle smile. All her children also greeted them. They entered the building and started climbing the stairs. The first to go was Erica, the eldest daughter of the late Maya. Casey followed, holding the hand of her son Troy, who was almost 4 years old. He had curly black hair, an exact copy of his father. Behind them, Maya's middle son Sam and her youngest daughter Julie weaved through the stairs. Casey herself was dark-skinned, petite and beautiful. Men often looked at her, but her husband Louis paid no attention to it, just like he paid no attention to his wife. Casey and Maya were not just childhood friends. Their bond was more like that of sisters. Maya and Casey were the only children in their families. No brothers, no sisters. There is no one to stand up for them. Maya was older and always protected her friend, defended her, and supported her. Once, Maya saved Casey's life. Casey was pushed off a bridge by some boys, not knowing that
an 11-year-old girl couldn't swim. She had never been taught, because her parents simply didn't have time for that. They were always busy with arguing and earning money. Casey found herself in the water, and Maya jumped in without hesitation. She didn't even remember that she had just been discharged from the hospital after being bitten by a dog and needing 15 stitches. Maya pulled Casey to the shore, but her wounds got infected, and she ended up in hospital with sepsis. She was barely saved. When Maya finished school, she moved to the city. From that point on, their communication became less frequent. They still called each other, of course, but now a different adult life had begun for Maya. There was a 4-year age difference between the girls. Maya got pregnant early, while still in college. Casey supported her as best she could. It was a difficult period. Her boyfriend, David, didn't want to marry her. They constantly argued, and Maya cried a lot. But things eventually got better, and they got married. With time, Maya and David had 3 kids. The woman had gained a little weight after childbirth, but she was still a true beauty. David loved her, even though they argued over trivial things. That's just how they were. Casey was a frequent guest at their house. It was David who introduced her to his best friend Louis. They started dating and then got married. Casey couldn't have gotten pregnant for a long time, but nevertheless their long-awaited Troy was finally born. The day David and Maya had an accident, Casey was left to look after their children. They were on their way to choose new wallpaper for the nursery. Maya insisted on a calm beige colour, while David argued for something bright, since it was a children's room. David wanted to bring the children with them, believing that seeing the bright wallpaper would make them take his side and prevent Maya from arguing. They were from that couple that was always fighting. However, whenever Maya was upset, David would lift her in his arms and spin her around, helping her forget her troubles and sorrows. This terrible morning, Maya and her children had already gotten into the car when suddenly their youngest, Julie, began to cry. "She has a sore throat. Let her stay home," Maya frowned. Sam, who adored his little sister, asked, "May I stay home too? I don't want to go and choose wallpaper. It's boring." Maya looked questioningly at her oldest daughter. "Okay, Mum, I'm staying too," Erica replied. Maya smiled with gratitude, promised to return quickly, and together with her husband drove away. At that time, their kids couldn't have imagined that it would be the last time they saw their parents. Maya and David died instantly in a car accident, just 5 minutes before reaching the store. The children were devastated with grief. When all 3 of them cried while looking at their parents' graves, Casey made the only decision that felt right to her. "I'll take them. They won't go to an orphanage." "What? Are you crazy? 3 at once? Take the oldest at least. She can help," her husband told her. "Why are you so heartless? They lost their parents. Their whole world has fallen apart. They shouldn't lose each other. And by the way, David was your best friend." They had been quarrelling for the whole week, and in the end, Casey started collecting documents without her husband's clear permission. The guardianship authorities met her request and placed the children under her responsibility. Louis's apartment felt spacious when there were only 3 of them, but with 6 people, everything changed. Louis often argued with his wife and couldn't contain his irritation. "Why do we have to get them all? Why didn't you listen to me? Don't I have a say in this?" he would say, but Casey couldn't understand how he could be so callous. "This is not up for question. Maya was like a sister to me. She saved my life. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't exist anymore. All I can do now is make sure her children don't become orphans. I'll be their mother and their family. It's up to you to decide. If you don't support me in this, that's your choice, but I won't change my mind," she said, hurt that her husband didn't share her feelings. Since then, their relationship has had cracks, although it wasn't perfect before. While Maya and David always fought and then resolved their issues, Casey and Louis were more silent in their family life. Sometimes the woman felt like they were strangers who were initially close but had long cooled off towards each other. They had no interest in each other's affairs, and in fact, they each lived their own lives. Louis always said that he didn't want to work for the man. He would occasionally make deals, buying goods low and selling them high. Over time, he started renting a truck and taking on different orders. Louis even had his own office, a small room, where he disappeared for days and nights recently. He claimed to be strategizing for a new business, but in reality, his ideas either didn't generate any income or required significant investments. And to Casey's upset, he often took money from the family budget. Casey received a good allowance for the 3 children, and the family lived off it. Initially, Louis was against having Maya's children in the house, but only until they received their first payment. "This is a gold mine," he rejoiced. Casey shook her head and said, "It's money for the children." However, Louis demanded money from Casey almost every month. So, a year went by. At first, Erica, the eldest of Maya's daughters, was hostile towards Casey, thinking she was trying to replace her mother. However, she eventually realized that wasn't the case and started treating Casey as a friend, sharing her problems and worries. They even went to a women's doctor together for a checkup. At the age of 16, Erica already had a boyfriend, whom Casey tried to treat as Maya would do. The woman accepted him as a member of the family, joked with him, and served him tea and food. Louis started coming home less frequently, often staying late at work. Casey devoted herself entirely to the children. However, the money was not enough to provide everything she wanted for them, so she began looking for a part-time job. One day, an elderly neighbour, Mrs. Lancaster, who occasionally helped Casey with the children, suggested, "Why don't you try working as a wife for an hour?" "What do you mean?" Casey was confused. "My daughter-in-law does that. You work for a firm and follow instructions on how to behave, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. You take orders, like cleaning someone's apartment before their parents' arrival. It's mostly ordered by wealthy young people who have a lot of money but not enough sense. Some rich people hire cleaners once a week to tidy up their mess. The pay is good. Sometimes there are other tasks like babysitting. You would be great at it. Just a few hours away from home, and you come back with money. The firm takes a cut, of course, but you get around 70%. The only thing is that the work is different, and your behaviour will be evaluated. There's a rating system where everyone can see how much you've worked and what feedback you've received. If you're rude, you'll get bad ratings, just like in school. But I know you, Casey. You're a hard-working woman. You'll do great." After hearing her neighbour's suggestion, Casey considered it. It wouldn't be a bad idea to work that way, but she'd have to try not to let Louis find out. Then she could give all the money to the children and buy them something they wanted. Erica had been wanting a new phone for a while, as she had been using a basic button phone for a year and couldn't even communicate with her peers properly in chat rooms. Casey went to the address given by her neighbour. Upon learning that Casey was raising her friend's 3 children, she was accepted without many questions. The boss, it turned out, had also taken in his deceased brother's 2 children some time ago. On her first day, he gave Casey a good payment, and she returned in the evening with gifts. It wasn't enough for a phone, but she could afford a delicious dinner and small treats for everyone. "Where's Louis?" Erica asked as they all sat down at the table. "I don't know. He's probably working late." Casey shrugged. The last thing she wanted to think about was where Louis was. He wasn't making her life any easier, like other husbands. He only created more difficulties. Not only did he contribute nothing to their family budget, but he also took money from the children's allowance. He used to spend money on groceries at least, but in recent months he brought nothing home except his dirty clothes and complaints about undercooked soup. Casey continued working part-time regularly. Within 2 weeks, she had saved enough to buy her eldest child a new cell phone and some clothes for the younger ones. On that day,
Casey saw off the children to school and kindergarten, then received a call on the app and hurried to the office. There she changed her clothes and within half an hour stood outside a large mansion. "Are you from the agency? Come on in." The beautiful girl greeted her confidently. She was stunningly beautiful, as if she lived in beauty parlours. Casey couldn't help but think that if she took better care of herself, she could look just as good. The hostess seemed to be around her age. The house, however, was messy. The girl didn't say another word to Casey and retired to her bedroom. The housekeeper, who lived there permanently, took care of cleaning, cooking and laundry, but there was still work to be done. She showed Casey what needed to be cleaned and tied. This time, Casey took a long time to clean up the mess left behind by the wealthy people. When she was almost finished, her gaze fell upon a portrait on the table. She couldn't believe her eyes. Her husband, Louis, was smiling at her in the picture. Casey took the picture frame in her hands. It can't be. Her first thought was that Louis had another family and was hiding the fact that he was a wealthy heir. Casey shook her head. No, that's definitely not it. The most plausible thought at this point seemed to be that it wasn't him. Maybe just a similar person. Casey looked closely. But they can't be that similar. Otherwise, if it is, it must be a twin brother. Casey continued cleaning, but for the next 2 hours, she kept thinking about this picture and her husband. If Louis has a twin brother, doesn't that mean Troy has an uncle somewhere? What if he also has children? Maybe Troy's cousin lives in this house. With these thoughts, Casey didn't realize how she had scrubbed the bathroom to a shine. "That's enough. Stop it." The elderly housekeeper smiled. "I see that you're capable and not afraid of work. From now on, I'll only invite you. Do you mind?" Casey smiled. "Of course, I'll be glad." "That's settled then." Casey left her contact information, and as she was leaving, she glanced at the portraits, asking, "And who is the man in the photo?" The housekeeper pressed her lips together. "We're not supposed to talk about our employer, but if you're interested, it's Brenda's new boyfriend. And he, that scoundrel, is already thinking about getting married. Brenda's father, Victor, doesn't like him, and I don't like him either. He is such an insolent person. But Brenda is in love. She's happy." Her father tried to open her eyes, but there was a big quarrel. Casey nodded and, saying goodbye, went back home. Louis was already there, primping himself in front of the mirror. "I have a business meeting today at my office. I'll be late," he said. Casey sat on the edge of the bed, remembering when he started disappearing into his office. "What's the meeting about?" she asked. "About trendy toys. I'll buy them cheaper and make a big profit." He smiled. "Give me money for a bouquet, eh? A brother and sister will be at the meeting. They have a family business in the toy field, and I want to impress." Casey shook her head distrustfully and pulled out half of what she had earned from her pocket. Louis smiled, took the money and left. Meanwhile, Casey remembered the address of her husband's office. Looking at her watch, she realized there was still an hour or so before kindergarten. She should have rested, but she couldn't. In the end, she left the house, walked to the bus stop, and got on the bus. Her plan was simple. She decided to tell Louis that he probably had a twin brother in town and look at his reaction. Casey got off the bus at the necessary bus station and looked around pensively, wondering where to go next. On the side of the shopping centre's entrance, a musician sat. It was a young man who looked like a homeless man, but it was hard to say for sure. Nowadays, young people dress like they're living on the streets. "Hi, would you like me to play for you?" the stranger asked. Casey smiled modestly. "Sorry, I don't have any money." "Neither do I, but that's not what I asked," the man replied with a grin. His blue eyes made Casey forget everything for a moment. The stranger was incredibly good-looking, with his blonde curly hair and attractive eyes. He seemed young, maybe in his early 30s. The baggy clothes on his skinny body
made him look even younger. He cradled a shabby guitar and suddenly started to play Casey's favourite song. The woman was amazed at how well he sang. "Why did you choose that particular song?" she asked after he had finished. "It's just my favourite one," he smiled. "You're very talented," Casey said, and looking at her watch, she realised that she had to hurry. She thanked the street musician, said goodbye to him, and continued on her way. When she reached the office, she realised she was afraid to get inside. However, she made an effort and pulled the doorknob. "Who are you here to see?" came from behind her. It was the guard. "This used to be my husband's office," said Casey. "This office hasn't been rented for 6 months, and the cleaning lady uses this room as a utility room," added the security guard. He opened the door, and Casey saw a familiar room. The same wallpaper, the same table and chair with a broken back. Only now it was apparently the janitor's private office. Casey thanked the guard and hurried to the bus stop. Her heart was heavy. She didn't take the same route, so she wouldn't run into that cute musician again. She didn't want him to see her upset, in case he wanted to play her something again, and she couldn't even manage a smile. Finally, Casey took the bus and went to the kindergarten. She listened to the teacher's complaints, then took the children home, fed them, met her other kids from school, helped everyone with their clothes, listened to a bunch of stuff about their classmates, teachers and other problems, and cleaned up the table. "Let me wash the dishes and you go and relax. I will take care of the little ones. You look upset," Erica said. Casey was pleased that the girl had noticed that something was wrong with her. Yes, Erica was like her mother, who caught the slightest changes in her mood, but stayed out of the way and helped as much as she could. That night, Louis did not come home. He wrote a message that he would be late and would not return until the day after tomorrow. He made up a story as if his new partners offered to show him their new warehouse in a neighbouring state, and he accepted. A stupid lie. With such lying skills, he was never going to be a businessman. Casey couldn't sleep that night. Louis didn't come home until the next day, and again he lied, looking at her straight in the eye. He didn't even ask how their son was doing, or how she herself was doing. Louis was absorbed in his own thoughts. Now Casey could see that. This time she decided to follow him. He stayed at home for exactly an hour, ate and went out again. Casey was so worried that she didn't take a new order, but went to catch the cheater in the act. She was disgusted by the thought that he mostly took money from her yesterday for a bouquet for his mistress, which Casey had earned by scrubbing the toilets, probably after him. When she saw Louis enter that very house, she was out of breath from shock. Brenda met him at the threshold and threw herself around his neck. "Yes, I don't greet him like that," Casey muttered under her breath and took a quick step forward. The door was unlocked. Casey entered the house and saw Louis and Brenda on a sofa in the luxurious living room. This very couch was the one she cleaned of dirt yesterday. "How could you?" she blurted out. Louis, seeing her, was taken aback. "What do you allow yourself? You're our new cleaning lady, aren't you?" Brenda asked firmly, not realizing what was going on. "Yes, I am your cleaning lady, and next to you is the cleaning lady's husband. My husband. Legitimate." "Brenda, darling, I'm sorry. I'll explain everything to you." Louis tried to justify himself. "We have a child together. What kind of person are you that you're meddling in someone else's family?" said Casey to Brenda with indignation. "Sort it out yourselves," said Brenda, leaving the room. Casey did not hold back, grabbed a vase from the table and threw it at Louis. He had to dodge sharply, and the vase shattered on the tiles. Casey felt like a clown in the circus. Suddenly, all her anger left her, leaving her with only bitter regret. She approached her husband, looked for a moment into his eyes, and then slapped him so hard that he even shrieked. Then she silently turned around and walked away. I'm going to divorce you. You're crazy. You can't control yourself, he said into her back. Casey cried and couldn't stop all the way. At the entrance, she was met by the same neighbour who had helped her with the kids. What's wrong? Come on, I'll give you some chamomile tea. It's soothing. Chamomile relieves inflammation. Valerian can calm down, said Casey, sobbing. Yes, dear, you know everything. Let's go. 10 minutes later, Casey held the tea with chamomile and valerian in her hands, but couldn't calm down, as she recounted what had happened. What are you going to do? Asked Mrs. Lancaster, after hearing the whole problem. I'm going to pack my things. I don't want to stay under the same roof with this... The tenants just moved out of Maya's apartment. I was planning to find new ones. We were going to rent it out until the kids grew up. But now, I'll just move in with them. Won't it be hard on the kids? They used to live there with their parents, asked the neighbour. Casey thought for a while. You're right. But I'll redo everything there. I'll buy new wallpaper, as Maya wanted, and then we'll move. Casey took on this plan. She rearranged the furniture, removed the old carpets, and changed the wallpaper in one of the rooms. It took her 2 days. She didn't stay at home during that time, and the children were at Mrs. Lancaster's. Everything is ready. The things are packed. We can move, Casey said when she had finished her little repairs. To tell the truth, she was literally exhausted, with no money left. Cleaning had always calmed her down, but the work she had done in the last few days had taken a toll on her body. The next morning, they all moved to the new apartment, but that same evening, Erica called an ambulance for her. Casey felt sick and fainted. At the hospital, she regained consciousness, but the doctors insisted on an additional checkup, and the ultrasound showed something completely unexpected. As far as we can see, there's nothing threatening to your pregnancy, but you must take care of yourself. Fainting may be a symptom of overexertion, so you need to think about your health. Casey was shocked. That was the last thing she needed. She already had 4 children and a husband she only wanted to divorce and never see again. What should she do now? Casey asked the doctor to let her go home, saying she needed to think about it. On the one hand, she wouldn't be able to handle a 5th child mentally, physically, or financially. On the other hand, she would never get rid of the baby, even if she lived on the streets. She wouldn't hurt the unborn miracle that was part of herself. No matter what Louis did, the children were not to blame. Troy was Casey's happiness. Maya's children had become her own. Casey told Mrs. Lancaster everything over the telephone. Oh, when I was young, I committed such a sin. It was difficult to do it then. After that, I was treated for a long time. And today doctors do everything well, so there will be no health problems later. Are you sure you don't want to do it? Honey, think twice. Casey shook her head, her thin fingers holding her smartphone with a cracked screen near her ear. No, I've decided I'm going to have the baby. That same day, Casey informed the children that they would soon have a baby brother or sister. But you're not our mum, frowned little Julie. Casey smiled. Of course I'm not your native mum, but I love you like family, and you are all equal to me. You are all my children. Then I want a little sister. We'll be playing with dolls together. Julie squealed with joy. No, let it be a boy. I already have enough sisters, Sam replied. Since that conversation, Erica hasn't allowed Casey to carry anything heavier than a glass of tea. She took care of her, as perhaps no one had ever taken care of her before. Casey even wept with emotion, although the hormones were probably to blame. Casey began to work harder. She wanted so much to buy everything for the new baby, a good crib, some toys. Louis refused to help his son Troy and Maya's children, even though he was their official guardian. If it weren't for him, Casey wouldn't have been given 3 children. I understand that your paternity over Maya's kid is just a formality, I promised you that I wouldn't hold you responsible for them. But you're Troy's father, and I'm pregnant with your child. We need money to pay for daycare and utilities." "Pregnant? With my child? That's nonsense. And don't you dare call here again, you extortionist. The child is not mine, do you understand?" In fact, Louis was afraid that Casey would ruin his relationship with the wealthy woman, as he had a serious crush on her father's fat wallet. Casey deeply regretted that she had told him about her pregnancy, but she had no other option. She needed money. So she started taking on 3 or 4 orders a day, working tirelessly. After a week of this grueling schedule, the bleeding started. It happened in the afternoon, when the children were not at home. She lost consciousness on the way to the hospital. When she awakened, the doctors told her the sad truth. "Your life is no longer in danger, but you will stay with us for a while. You will still have the ability to have children in the future, but this time, I'm very sorry." These last words pierced Casey's heart like a sharp knife. "I lost a child?" she exclaimed in horror. "Yes, you had a miscarriage due to overexertion. You had internal bleeding, but you were brought to the hospital just in time," the doctor explained. Casey stared at the wall, lost in her thoughts. It was nighttime, and she had been crying all day and night. Erica visited her every day until the doctor said she could go home. "Don't worry, I've already told everyone that there won't be a baby yet. You don't have to say anything to anyone." Erica expressed her anger, and when Casey confided in her about Louis' cheating, his refusal to help, and his words about the baby, she added, "It's all Louis' fault. He is such a jerk." "Thank you, Erica. I would have cried if I had to tell them myself. They wanted the little brother or sister so badly." "It's for the best, Casey. You will have children, but with a normal man, not that traitor." Casey returned home, and the children gathered around her, eager to share their news. Troy climbed into his mother's arms and asked, "So the stalk with the baby is delayed?" Casey sadly nodded. "Yes, it turns out that he wanted to bring the baby to someone else instead of us. They don't have any children, and he said they needed the baby first. They would be happy, and then he would bring him to us. Is that okay? Are you upset? There are so many of us, and some don't have any children at all." Casey improvised her response. "No, Mum, I'm not upset. Can you please buy me Lego?" Casey sighed. "Of course I will." The woman had to start over again. She regained her composure and went back to work. She was hired by other wealthy families and visited them almost every day, doing various tasks. The pay was decent, and there were allowances for the children. Casey managed, and life went on as usual. One day, Casey encountered the street musician again, the one who played the guitar. He was playing a tune, and people were tossing money into his hat. Casey intended to walk past him when he abruptly changed his repertoire and played a familiar melody. Casey stopped, realizing that he was playing it for her. "Well, hello," he greeted her when she turned around. "Hi, I didn't want to bother you," Casey replied. "And I've been waiting for you to pass by again. Could I buy you a coffee?" the guy suggested. Casey shrugged her shoulders. He appeared rather shabby, but his face was cleanly shaved, and his manners betrayed him as someone who, if not aristocratic, was certainly not a tramp. They sat at a table in an outdoor cafe and talked about music. It felt like magic. Casey didn't know him, but for some reason she wanted to spend time with him, even just half an hour of freedom, to do what she wanted, not what she had to do. His name was Adam. He was funny and shared stories about the street musicians he had met. Casey laughed wholeheartedly. "Maybe I'll see you again?" he asked. Casey realized that the man didn't quite know the situation he was getting himself into. She sighed. "I have 4 children, Adam." "Great! Bring them here tomorrow. I want to meet everyone. And you surprised me. I actually thought you were not even 18 yet. Casey smiled. You're a flatterer. I will bring them tomorrow, and you will play their favourite song. Any song of their choice. Casey nodded and went about her business. She was smiling that evening, and it made her soul feel a little brighter. The next day, Casey brought all her family to the same place, and Adam greeted them with a smile. He entertained Casey's children and the others by playing their favourite songs and engaging them with musical riddles. It was a lot of fun. Afterwards, he invited Casey and her children to a cafe, treating everyone. Surprisingly, he didn't touch the money earned from his performance, instead using a neat, expensive wallet to pay with a card. Who are you really? Casey asked, curious. Adam grinned. Me? An undercover agent, he cheerfully replied. Casey shook her head. And seriously? Adam changed the topic of the conversation, leaving her question without an answer. They spent a great time together, and such enjoyable evenings began to occur regularly. Adam and Casey would call and meet up once or twice a week. On one particular day, Casey baked a cake at home and wanted to share it with her new acquaintance. The cake turned out to be delicious, and she was excited to show it off. Where are you? Are you in the same place where you're performing today? She asked. Don't come today. Sorry, I can't talk right now. Adam abruptly ended the call. Casey didn't understand what was wrong. It was almost dark outside, so she decided to quickly give him the pie and leave. As she walked down the street, she heard a familiar tune. He must be performing for someone and wants to earn some money, Casey thought to herself. She approached the source of the music and saw Adam tossing his guitar aside and chasing after a man. The man ran, but suddenly stopped and pulled out a knife. They were getting closer to Casey. Adam noticed her, and at that moment, the man stabbed him in the stomach. Casey screamed, dropping the cake. The hooded stranger prepared to strike again, this time targeting Casey. Just as he was about to attack, a deafening gunshot rang out. Casey flinched, and when she opened her eyes, the attacker had fallen. Adam lay on the ground, face down, blood pouring from his wound. Casey composed herself and called an ambulance while covering Adam's wound with her hands. Adam regained consciousness briefly before losing it again. What did he do? Steal your money? What were you chasing him for? Casey asked in desperation. He was getting kids hooked on bad things. I told you I was an undercover agent. It was true, Casey, Adam explained. Casey couldn't believe it. Please don't die, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. It's not the first time. Don't be afraid. I'm going to be okay, he reassured her before losing consciousness once more. At the hospital, Casey identified herself as Adam's girlfriend and was allowed to accompany him. While at the hospital, police officers took her statement, confirming that Adam Foster was an undercover officer who had been working on dismantling the local drug trade. Due to his background in music, he was chosen for this particular mission. Casey mentioned that he had saved her life, and the officer informed her that he was single, with a wink. But at that moment, Casey only cared about Adam. The operation had already been underway for 4 hours. Suddenly, a thin woman entered the corridor. She approached them hurriedly, and Casey assumed she must be a relative of Adam's, since he wasn't married. What's wrong with him? The stranger asked. Casey looked up and was stunned in shock. It was Brenda. You? Casey said, horrified. Brenda's expression changed. I don't care about you. How is Adam? And why did you come here? Casey stared at her ex-husband's mistress in disbelief. Suddenly, Brenda began crying like a child, her voice trembling. Casey put her arm around her. Calm down, he's in surgery. Sit down, I'll explain everything to you.
Casey guided Brenda to a chair in the hospital corridor and proceeded to tell her how she had met Adam and what had transpired since then. "And I'm his sister," said Brenda after Casey's explanations. "Adam and my father never got along. Dad, he's in business, and Adam is too honest for that. He likes order and justice. So he joined the police, left home and never took a penny more from our father. But he opened an account which gave him access to it anyway. I don't know if Adam uses it, and I'm like between two fires. My mum died a year ago, cancer. Dad was inconsolable. He asked Adam to take over his business, but he wouldn't do it. But in fact, he just wanted his son to come home. Our dad feels lonely. He doesn't know about Adam's injury yet. I haven't told him. If anything happens, I just won't get over it. And neither will Daddy." Casey tried to calm Brenda, and all the anger at her went away. It was the 5th hour of the operation. "You forgive me," she said. "Louis said that his wife was cheating on him, that she made him to adopt other people's children. He said so many bad things about you. That's why I acted the way I did." "Louis loves money, Brenda. I'm sorry, but you won't like what I'm going to say right now." Casey told her how Louis did not like to work, how he didn't want to accept his best friend's children, but he lived on their allowance, and how he asked her for money for flowers for Brenda. The young woman listened in silence. "I had a failed romance before Louis, and then I just lost my head. He surrounded me with care. No, I'm not stupid, and I noticed that he cared about my position. But I was really desperate at that time. The fact that he was married didn't bother me. I mean, he said that you weren't living as husband and wife anymore." Casey shook her head. "At the time I made the scandal at your house, I was pregnant. I haven't had a single man in my life except him." Brenda rounded her eyes in shock. "But we were already preparing for the wedding. He swore he didn't live with you and slept over at a friend's house." Brenda shook her head. "My whole life turned upside down today. If my brother doesn't quit this damn job, I'm going to kill him myself," she blurted out and started to cry. "He won't, as far as I've gotten to know him," smiled Casey. "Yeah, that's for sure." At that moment, the doctor came in and said that the operation had been successful, and that if Casey hadn't turned Adam over and clamped the wound, he wouldn't have made it to the hospital. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The worst was over, and now they could only wait for Adam to recover. After the conversation with Casey, Brenda immediately ended her relationship with Louis. He started calling Casey and trying to imply that if she didn't accept him back into the family, he would ensure that her children would be taken away from her. Upon learning about this, Brenda called him and told him firmly, "If you come near my brother's fiancée again, I'll tell Daddy, and he'll take care of you. Do you understand? You're such a despicable person. Forget about her." Louis was shocked. He knew that Brenda's father had someone who could handle problems in a less pleasant manner. So he promised to leave his ex-wife alone, and Casey never heard about him again. Adam recovered. He didn't return to his father's house, but after that terrible accident, their relationship improved. Casey and Brenda became like real sisters. Brenda certainly was a little eccentric and spoiled, but Casey, alone raising 4 children, became for her like a standard of kindness and compassion. Casey and Adam's relationship progressed quickly, and when he proposed to her, she couldn't refuse. His father arranged a grand wedding, and a year later, they welcomed twins, 2 charming girls. Ethan was going through the park when he spotted a cosy bench by the lonely fountain. Feeling the need for a break, he decided to sit down. People walked back and forth along the road. Some hurried about their business, while others leisurely strolled. Smiling young mothers pushed strollers, and small children rode scooters and bicycles. It was an idyllic picture. All this brought back memories of a beautiful park in the centre of a small town where he spent his childhood. Ethan's mother worked a lot, so his grandmother took care of him until the 5th grade. They would often visit the park, feeding the birds and having conversations about anything and everything. As Ethan thought about his grandmother, a sad but grateful smile crossed his face. She was perhaps the closest and dearest person to him. She died when Ethan was already a university student in his 3rd year, and it took him a long time to come to his senses. Later, he often reminisced about her, especially during significant moments in his life. She had noticed his knack for math early on, even before he started school. "Ethan has a brilliant mind. I think he can be a talented engineer, and then a great future will be ahead of him," the woman would proudly declare. She'd worked in architecture all her life, so she knew what she was talking about. Ethan's mother would simply smile. She thought her mother praised Ethan out of her blind love, but Ethan did indeed turn out to be a talented mathematician. It became evident in the 1st grade. While other children struggled with basic operations, Ethan solved problems of increased complexity, meant for 4th graders. The teacher assigned him additional tasks to keep him interested during lessons. "It's a pity your grandfather can't see what you've become," the grandmother would sigh, looking at yet another diploma Ethan had earned from the city's mathematics competition. Ethan's grandfather had passed away a few months after his birth. The grandfather was a surgeon, enthusiastic, attentive and thoughtful. He was loved and respected in their town. He died right at his workplace. He became dizzy, his eyes darkened, and his chest was constricted. He was immediately taken to the cardiology department, but they couldn't save him. The grandmother often shared stories about her husband, creating a vivid and realistic image in Ethan's mind. So in a way, Ethan's grandfather remained present in his life. But his father, Ethan knew nothing about him. As he grew older, he began to ask questions, longing for a male figure to be by his side. His grandmother and mother, though wonderful and caring, could not fill that role. Ethan yearned for someone to talk to about masculine topics, to play sports with, and to discuss problems with. For a long time, both his mother and grandmother evaded his questions. "It's not my secret," his grandmother would say. As for his mother, she would either change the subject or claim to be busy. But one day she finally gave up. "He left me when he found out I was pregnant. He ran away, that's all." The usual story. He was from out of town. He said he was from the capital, but who knows? He was working here. He told me plenty of lies, then disappeared. All I know about him is his name and city of residence. After he left, I realized I was waiting for you. I also realized that I'd leave the baby behind no matter what. My parents supported me," the mother sighed. "After a few months, he appeared here again. He called me and asked me out. When he saw my rounded belly, he ran away. He was scared. I didn't blame him. But I'm glad to have you. Well, that's about it. It's not a pretty story, so I don't want you to ask any more questions about it." Ethan was old enough to understand that it was hard for his mother to remember those times, because it turned out that she had behaved too frivolously. However, since then, the boy had stopped dreaming about the long-awaited meeting with his father and stopped imagining him as a hero, a pilot, a long-distance sailor, a military man. His mother's confession freed the boy from illusions. Ethan lived with his grandmother until he was 11 or 12. Then he moved in with his mother. She rented an apartment not far from the math high school, and it was more convenient to get to school from his mother's place. But still, Ethan went to his beloved granny every weekend. He missed her, his room, his cat, and the atmosphere that reigned in the apartment where his childhood passed. Soon, Ethan fell in love with a girl named Kim. They were in different classes, but they had physical education at the same time. Ethan did not shine in sports. In all subjects in his diary there were A's, but in physical education, he was a loser. Kim was impossible not to notice. She was tall, slender, light and graceful, like a panther. Straight nose, dark eyebrows apart, plump, beautifully curved lips, and huge eyes of some unreal turquoise colour. Kim was a beauty, and she knew it very well. The girl hung around mostly popular boys, who were handsome, athletic, self-confident, and had an excellent sense of humour. Ethan had never been like that. But he had other advantages. The boy quickly became one of the best mathematicians in the school. His grandmother was right. Ethan's talent really opened in the walls of a specialised school in full measure. Teachers praised him, practised with him additionally, and gave him tasks of increased complexity. Then one day Kim approached him at recess. "Hi," she smiled radiantly. "My name's Kim. We have physical education with your class at the same time. Do you remember me?" Ethan weakly nodded, unable to utter a word due to his emotions. "You see," Kim continued hesitantly, "the mathematician gave us a difficult homework assignment. I didn't understand anything, and it will affect my final grade. My mother will be furious. Please, help me." Ethan was not only willing to solve the homework for Kim, but he was also ready to move mountains. He agreed without hesitation, eager to see the joy in the girl's turquoise eyes. "Thank you," Kim exclaimed. "You're really cool. That's what the girls in your class say about you." After that, Kim and Ethan did not become friends, but Ethan suddenly began to exist for her. She always greeted him, and sometimes they exchanged glances during physical education class. In high school, Kim started dating Paul, the captain of the local soccer team. That year, there were many couples at school, perhaps due to their age. Ethan felt an unpleasant feeling of jealousy when he saw them together. He knew he was still in love with Kim, and the childish feeling had not disappeared. Ethan wasn't interested in other girls, although some of his classmates clearly sympathized with him. If he had shown even the slightest initiative, they would have gladly gone on a date with him. But all his thoughts revolved around the unattainable Kim. Ethan rejoiced when rumours spread that Paul had left Kim for an older girl. In retaliation, Kim almost immediately started dating a guy who was also older than her. He picked her up after school in his own car. He was handsome and stylish. Every day, with eyes shining with happiness, Kim stepped into the cabin of the beautiful car, waiting for her at the school parking lot, and the couple drove away. The girls gossiped that Kim's new boyfriend was the son of very wealthy parents, and of course, they envied her deep in their hearts. Lucky Kim. He's crazy about her. They'll get married when she turns 18. Kim got a ticket to a happy life. She doesn't need to study. She'll have all the money she wants. At that age, most girls dreamed of meeting a prince, a man who would shower them with expensive gifts and fulfill all their desires, just like in the movies. They didn't realize that free cheese was only in a mousetrap. Ethan felt like a pauper compared to Kim's new admirer. He had a car and rich parents, and what did Ethan have? He was just an ordinary guy. Meanwhile, life went on. Ethan graduated from high school and went to university. He had heard that Kim had actually married that guy as soon as she turned 18 and didn't pursue her studies. Her father-in-law had set her up in his company as a secretary. Kim received a fabulous salary, drove her new fancy car, lived with her husband in a luxurious apartment in the city centre, and often went on vacations abroad. In short, she had fulfilled the collective dream of the local girls. His studies saved him, courses, exams, projects, and finally he got a reward. He, as a promising young specialist, was taken on an internship at a large oil company. It was not easy to get a job there, but many people aspired to work there because the salaries were 3 or 4 times higher than the average in the region. At first, Ethan was both glad and overwhelmed when he received his first paycheck, but he had been working hard, so it was fair. It seemed that Ethan had forgotten about Kim. The memories of their first childhood love were gone, as were the torment and worry that their union was impossible. Ethan even started dating a girl, and their relationship quickly became serious. Nina was studying at the same university, just a year younger. They met for the first time at a student conference. Nina was sweet, kind, and open-minded. She was very intelligent and passionate about modern architecture. Ethan knew that Nina truly loved him. He could see it in her eyes and feel it in her touch. It was a surprisingly pleasant feeling to know that someone loved him so sincerely. However, Ethan himself did not feel the same intense emotions for Nina. It was not like what he had experienced in school with Kim. Ethan respected Nina, and he wanted to take care of her. He enjoyed making her happy and seeing a smile on her face. They agreed on important matters, often understood each other without words, and even finished each other's sentences. It was a complete harmony. For Ethan it seemed like more than enough. The feelings he had for Kim in school were just teenage passions. Adults experience the world differently, and that's normal. The important thing was that he felt good and calm with Nina. The couple didn't rush into getting married, it was a mutual decision. They were already happy together. First, they both wanted to establish themselves in their careers and stand on their own 2 feet before starting a family. Neither Nina, Ethan, nor their mutual friends doubted that they would eventually get married. It was a given. After his internship, Ethan was offered a full-time position at the same oil company. His salary increased, and the volume and complexity of his tasks grew as well. When Nina received her diploma, she, as a young and promising graduate, was gladly accepted into an architectural firm recommended by the rector. Her eyes sparkled with delight as she told Ethan about her new job, and he understood her excitement. Nina moved in with Ethan. By that time, he had bought an apartment with a mortgage and even renovated it. They lived like a real family, and of course, they planned to have a wedding. They mutually agreed to postpone having children for now, but they wanted to formalize their relationship. Nina dreamed of a summer wedding. She wanted to wear a light white dress, have a photo session outdoors, and celebrate by the bank of a nearby wide river. Ethan liked all of Nina's ideas. However, after all, this didn't interest him too much. To be honest, his thoughts were mainly occupied with another big project. In February, Nina went to visit her parents in a neighbouring city for a while. She had planned to stay with them for an extended period, and she suddenly had a week off, so she took the opportunity. That day, Ethan and his colleagues received funding from the company's management for an important project. Someone suggested celebrating the occasion, and Ethan agreed with pleasure. After the tense and nerve-wracking negotiations, they decided to go to a bar in the city centre. Carl, one of Ethan's colleagues and close friends, assured that the bar had the best live music, the most delicious beer, and the most beautiful girls. No objections were raised. The bar was bustling with activity, with almost all the tables and seats occupied. However, for Carl, a regular at the bar, the administrator managed to find a small sofa in the corner. The group settled down comfortably and engaged in lively conversation, jokes and laughter. They felt like winners and made plans for the funds they had worked hard to get, dreaming that their new idea would bring them substantial profits. Suddenly, Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. He spotted Kim. Memories from their youth flooded his mind, causing his head to spin and his pulse to quicken. Even though he was a grown and established man, he felt the profound influence she had on him. It seemed that his feelings for her had not diminished or changed over time. It was unbelievable. When Ethan noticed Kim, she was standing at the counter, engaged in a conversation with a waitress. The two exchanged smiles, indicating a friendly relationship between them. Kim, her smile was captivating. Her long hair, the colour of milk chocolate, cascaded freely on her shoulders. Her turquoise eyes, set on a beautiful tanned face, still shone with a certain allure, but now there was an elusive quality to them, perhaps hidden sadness or anxiety. Ethan hadn't noticed this during their school years. Kim was dressed in an emerald knitted dress, showcasing her slender legs, paired with bulky winter sneakers, creating a semi-sporty and elegant image. Kim then moved further into the corner of the hall with the waitress, becoming invisible from where Ethan was sitting. He didn't want to lose sight of her, so he quickly got up and followed the girls. Ethan managed to catch a glimpse of Kim slipping into the back room, so he decided to wait. He knew that sooner or later she would come out, and their encounter was inevitable. But what would he say to her? Ethan didn't know, and he was filled with worry and anxiety, going over casual and non-committal phrases in his head. Finally the door opened, and Kim almost jumped into Ethan's arms. He was not expecting to see her like this. Kim was dressed in the uniform of the bar's waitstaff, a black t-shirt, tight black jeans, a grey apron, and a name badge reading Kim on her chest. "Is she a waitress? How is that possible?" ran through Ethan's mind. "She's married to a wealthy man and supposed to live a glamorous social life, not running around the bar with trays." The woman was about to pass Ethan when he finally got the courage to call her out. "Kim, is that really you?" She stopped and carefully examined him from head to toe, and a hint of recognition appeared in her eyes. Kim suddenly seemed embarrassed, awkwardly smiled and replied, "Yes, it's me. And you're Ethan, right?" "Yes." "Wow, you've become such a man." "What do you mean?" Kim charmingly smiled. She was no longer shy. "Back in school, you were a typical nerd, long and thin, not particularly attractive, but you know, time often works wonders for men like you." Ethan blossomed at this compliment. Kim had clearly expressed her sympathy. It was incredible. Ethan's self-confidence and strength immediately returned to him. "What about you? Are you working here?" Ethan asked. "As you can see," Kim sighed, and the smile faded from her face. "Life is a strange and unpredictable thing. Who would have thought it would turn out like this?" What had happened? "It's not a pretty story, but I always say that everything happens for the best, even when it doesn't seem that way. How about you? What do you do now?" "I work at an oil company." "Ah, right. I heard about that from someone. Well, good for you. You've always been smart and determined." Kim stood right next to him, complimenting Ethan and looking at him. The way she looked at him, there was so much in that gaze. Interest, admiration, warmth and tenderness. "And here we are, celebrating a corporate event with my colleagues," Ethan explained, gesturing towards his table. "That's great. How long are you planning to stay here?" Ethan shrugged. "It'll be a little less crowded at the end of the shift. Let's talk, okay? It's so nice to see someone from my childhood. It was the best time ever." Throughout the evening, Kim was busy going from table to table with trays, smiling at visitors and exchanging short phrases with them. Kim and Ethan often met eyes, and a warm wave of happiness flooded Ethan's heart at such moments. As Ethan's co-workers were leaving, he walked them to the cab. "Why aren't you coming?" Carl wondered. "I'm going to stay a little longer." "I see." Carl smiled conspiratorially. "Is it because of the pretty girl with the tray you've been staring at all evening?" "Just don't forget that you have Nina." Carl left, and Ethan pondered his words. Nina, kind, intelligent, faithful, and reliable. It would surely be unpleasant for her to know that the man she was going to marry in the summer decided to linger in the bar, not just for fun with his colleagues, but to chat with his first love. On the other hand, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was simply curious to know how Kim ended up working as a waitress. As closing time approached, only a few people remained in the bar. Kim finally had a chance to sit down at Ethan's table. She looked a little tired, but for some reason that made her even more attractive. "Oh, it's been a tough shift," she said, smiling at Ethan. "Can I order something for you?" "No, thanks. I'll have to get it myself then." And I'd better sit here, my legs are buzzing. It's a requirement at our bar for waitresses to wear heels.
They look good on you,
Ethan said. Thank you, but a waitress uniform isn't something I'd want to wear, of course.
Then why?
Well, it might be my fate. You know, I got married right out of high school to Oscar, who I dated in high school. Well, it was like a fairy tale at first. I couldn't even believe that kind of life was possible. A huge apartment that looked like it came from an interior design magazine. A loving, handsome, caring husband who drove me everywhere in an expensive car and showered me with gifts. A credit card that was regularly topped up with substantial amounts of money, without me even having to ask. Travelling, my dream job. Oscar's father hired me as a secretary for a top manager in his firm. My only job was to record calls from people trying to reach the boss when he was out, and to make coffee for him a couple of times a day. That was it. I sat in a beautiful office, read novels, played games on my phone, painted my nails, and chatted with female co-workers. I changed outfits all the time. Going to work was like a runway show. I felt so beautiful, and the salary was more than decent. What about your studies? Didn't you enroll in any college? Oh, I was naive and a fool. I didn't even think about it back then. I had a beautiful, bright and full life. It seemed like it would always be that way. But as time went on, the always attentive and alert Oscar changed. He started working late and going on endless business trips, returning with a tan for some reason. I, engrossed in new acquaintances, work and shopping, and didn't notice it immediately. But when I realised that something was wrong, I became frightened. That's when I realised that my happiness was fragile and illusory, entirely dependent on Oscar's attitude towards me, his decisions and his plans. Oscar kept drifting away, and it drove me into a panic. I tried to fix the situation with luxury lingerie, culinary delights and unusual gifts for my spouse. I even broached the subject of having a child, although initially we had agreed not to have kids. However, Oscar remained indifferent to all my efforts and attempts to restore our previous relationship, except for when I brought up having a baby. That made him a little angry. He said that we weren't ready yet. Then one day, I got into his cell phone when he was in the bathroom. Usually Oscar took his cell phone with him everywhere, but then he left the gadget on the table and I took advantage of it. And to my utter horror, I stumbled across my husband's correspondence with someone named Christina. It was clear that Christina was Oscar's mistress. The messages exchanged between Oscar and Christina were quite explicit. They included text messages interspersed with photos of Christina in revealing outfits, and there was even a video. When Oscar came out of the bathroom, I demanded an explanation. I expected that Oscar would try to justify himself, but he only shrugged his shoulders and said, "What's the big deal? Only now have I realised that in Oscar's view of the world, having a mistress was a normal part of life. After all, Oscar's father behaved the same way, as did most of his father's friends. Men make money and do what they want. Women put up with everything and serve their husbands. Everyone has a role to play," he said to me, referring to what his father taught him a long time ago. At first, I was even willing to tolerate it for the sake of a comfortable life. But then I felt threatened by Christina. I tried to talk to my husband carefully without insulting him, but still letting him know that his behaviour was unacceptable. However, this tactic didn't work. One day, a scandal broke out. Oscar called things by their proper names, reminding me of where he had taken me from, and what I had gained from our union. He said that everything had a price. I felt worthless. No, I wasn't afraid of losing Oscar now. I was disgusted with him. He was a pompous peacock, proud of his parents' fortune. The only thing I didn't want to give up was my new life, the life I had already grown accustomed to, and so I resigned myself to it. At times I was disgusted with myself, but I continued to live with Oscar, pretending to be an exemplary wife and showing unearthly love when necessary. In return, I received unlimited amounts of money. But there was my second mistake. I didn't use them to start my own business or even buy a separate apartment. No, I squandered it all on momentary entertainment, beautiful clothes, trips with girlfriends to expensive clubs, trips to the sea, luxury perfume, and similar pleasures that helped me distract myself and feel happy. And then one day, Oscar announced to me that we were getting a divorce, as if it were a minor matter. I found as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. I understood that I would have to return to my parents. All the jointly acquired property was registered in Oscar's father's name, which meant that after the divorce I would receive nothing. And the worst part is that I had no profession, no savings. Kim sighed sadly again. I'm sorry for being so frank with you. I'm just tired of keeping everything inside. And you've always been good, understanding, and wise beyond your years. It's a pleasure to talk to you like this. Ethan was silent and only looked at her with sympathy and love in his eyes. So Kim continued her story. I couldn't live with his parents. I sold some of my branded clothes and pawned jewellery, just enough to rent an apartment for 6 months. Then I went on a job hunt, because of course I was fired from my ex-father-in-law's firm. After a long search, I managed to find a job as a waitress at this bar. I like it here, Kim finally smiled. The music's good and the people are fun. It's enjoyable, even. I'm so sorry, Ethan said finally. It must be so hard for you. It's okay. It's a good thing we didn't have the opportunity to have children, or I would have been tied to him for life. Well, to hell with him. He always treated me condescendingly, as if he looked down on me. And to me, a naive and young fool at the time, it seemed like it was his care, his patronage, and his love. But it was nothing like that. His new wife will hardly be happy with him, so I'm even glad I got rid of him. Well, what about you? Kim looked into Ethan's eyes. Tell me about yourself. Do you have someone? No. Ethan lied for some reason. I don't have anyone. I'm single. He couldn't tell about Nina. Looking at Kim, he had neither the strength nor the will to do so. That evening they sat at a table near the wall, reminiscing about their past, joking and recalling mutual acquaintances. Ethan easily and naturally confessed to Kim how much he had been in love with her for several years. I wish I had known that. I was looking for sincere feelings and love, but the guys that were hanging around me, they just wanted one thing. I thought there was no other way. Then they walked around the city all night, not wanting to part. Ethan put his arm around Kim's shoulders, and she clung to him trustingly. She invited him to her place. Kim rented an apartment not far from the bar, and Ethan agreed. They spent the night together. Their first night. In the morning, Ethan felt truly happy because Kim was next to him. He felt an unprecedented surge of strength and a pleasant lightness of mind. This mood was not overshadowed even by the thought of Nina. He would talk to her, explain everything. Nina was smart, she would understand. Dreams must come true, otherwise life loses all meaning. Kim and Ethan started dating. He told her about Nina because he wanted to be sincere and honest with his beloved. Kim was clearly upset, tense and distrustful. This has happened to me before, she said in a slumped tone. There was a man in my life who promised he'd divorce me, but he didn't. We're in an entirely different situation, and Nina and I aren't even married. The conversation with Nina was long and arduous. Ethan sweated as if he had unloaded 3 cars of coal. Nina, who was usually calm and rational, became hysterical, sobbing, and begged Ethan to come to his senses. She even cursed him and Kim. Ethan's heart clenched with pain as he looked at his former fiancée. It seemed that Nina truly loved him. Later, Ethan heard from mutual acquaintances that Nina couldn't bear life without him and attempted to end her life. Fortunately, she was quickly found and saved. Nina spent some time in the hospital, receiving treatment from psychiatrists. Because of this impulsive act, she lost her prestigious job. Ethan felt guilty about what happened to her, but how could he help her? You don't have to sacrifice your happiness and your dreams for another person. No one is obliged, Kim soothed her beloved. Immediately after Ethan's breakup with Nina, Kim moved in with him. They both didn't want to part and wanted to be constantly close to each other. Ethan offered Nina help through mutual friends, but she proudly refused. She no longer wanted to hear about her former fiancé. In the end, everything turned out well for Nina. Her health improved, she recovered at work, got married, and gave birth to 2 wonderful boys. Ethan was happy for Nina and even tried to call her once to talk, but he realized that Nina now resented him, despite the years that had passed and the positive events in her life. Ethan and Kim also got married. The initial passion settled down a bit, and life took a calm course. Ethan rejoiced in his life and believed that it would only get better from now on. Kim decided to quit her job. He considered himself not entitled to advise her to do so, but if she wanted to, well, Ethan only supported her. The man believed he could adequately provide for their small family. After Kim became a housewife, all at home became cosier, somehow at once. Now, when Ethan returned from work, the rooms were always tidy and smelled of delicious food. However, at some point, an unforeseen event occurred. The company where Ethan had worked for years went bankrupt due to intense competition. Suddenly, Ethan found himself unemployed. Of course, he received offers from other companies, but the salaries were 3 times lower than what he earned at his previous job. In general, the family had to cut back on expenses. Kim was accustomed to a lavish lifestyle, indulging in fitness clubs, spas, shopping, and cosmetology treatments. She dressed in brand clothes, dined with friends at restaurants, and enjoyed short trips to the sea multiple times a year. However, all of that came to a halt. Ethan was just concerned, but Kim, for her, the decline in their quality of life was a tragedy, and the worst part was that it wasn't just a temporary setback. Ethan had no prospects in this city. Kim tried to encourage Ethan to start his own business. Kim, what are you talking about? Entrepreneurship needs a different kind of character. I'm not like that, Ethan honestly responded. He couldn't see himself as a business leader. He didn't require mentality or strength. Instead, he excelled as a performer. Yeah, well, that requires a core, like in Oscar. Kim shook her head in disappointment. It hurt Ethan that he was compared unfavourably to Oscar, but he never reminded Kim that her ex-husband had dumped her. Since that conversation, Kim has refused to cook, clean, or do any housework, despite not having a job. I'm not a free maid, she declared to her husband in the evenings. Ethan sighed and went to the kitchen to prepare something for himself, pasta, sausages, or fried eggs. He forgave Kim for her unfair reproaches and whims. He understood that she was going through a difficult time. He hoped that with time she would calm down. The most important thing for him was to preserve their relationship and avoid unnecessary conflicts. Then Kim informed Ethan that she was expecting a child. The father-to-be was overjoyed. However, Kim herself didn't seem thrilled and even considered getting rid of this unexpected pregnancy. Fortunately, Ethan managed to talk her out of it. The pregnancy was severe. Kim experienced discomfort, back pain, stomach pain, and constant mood swings. In all her suffering, she blamed Ethan for not being able to provide enough for her and the baby. Ethan felt guilty, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't earn as much as he had before. His salary was already considered very good by the city's standards, but Kim wanted more. Ethan believed that after the birth of their child, Kim would change. Hormones often affect pregnant women, and things usually return to normal. But in their case, that didn't happen. When Ethan came home from work, he often encountered a distressing scene. Their daughter crying in her crib, while Kim sat in another room, wearing headphones and engrossed in social media conversations. Ethan tried to discuss the upbringing of their daughter delicately, avoiding offence. He emphasised the baby's need for her attention, warmth and care. "Do you want to spoil her?" Kim used to say it angrily, narrowing her eyes. "Are you saying we should take her in the arms every time she cries, fuss over her non-stop, and forget about ourselves?" "No, of course not, but—" At this point, Kim would always interrupt him, bombarding Ethan with accusations that made him feel insignificant. Kim shouted that she needed rest. She had just given birth to a new life, enduring 9 months of agony, followed by the demands of caring for the baby 24/7, without any assistance or the opportunity to take even a day off. "You can't send me to the sea for a week. We can't afford it. You can't hire a nanny so I can pursue my own interests. You have no right to dictate my actions, so just shut up." Kim's voice and expression were filled with hatred and contempt, leaving Ethan at a loss for words and unable to comfort his beloved. He felt like a complete failure. It was painful to realise that his beloved saw him as a miserable loser. He remembered how kind and friendly Kim used to be when they had more financial stability. He blamed himself for not being able to provide adequately for his beloved and daughter, as their relationship crumbled. Every day, after returning from work, Ethan willingly took on household chores, cooking, cleaning and playing with his daughter. He even enjoyed it. Then Ethan hired a nanny to relieve some of the burden on his wife. However, Kim remained dissatisfied even with this. She did not get along with the nanny, who didn't hesitate to point out her shortcomings in dealing with her own child, so they had to part ways with her. The next nanny was less talkative and more indifferent. Kim breathed a sigh of relief as she finally gained some freedom. She met with friends, went shopping, and indulged in spa treatments. Although she couldn't live life to the fullest as before, Ethan made sure that there was always money available for her entertainment. He understood that women on maternity leave needed occasional relaxation. However, Kim's behaviour became more and more far from normal. The woman became increasingly distant from both Hayley and Ethan, living her own life. She only came home to sleep, occasionally showing up in the morning in an intoxicated state. Ethan believed that all this trouble was a temporary thing. He still loved her and hoped that her behaviour was simply some kind of postpartum depression. However, by the time Hayley was almost a year old, not much had changed. Ethan often observed the behaviour of other women when he walked with Hayley or accompanied her to clinics. He noticed how mothers looked at their babies, caring for them with infinite tenderness. Hayley never experienced any of that. Her mother was cold and indifferent, only touching her when necessary and never playing, singing or reciting poems to her. Ethan tried to start a business, believing that financial stability would improve Kim's state of mind. However, his attempts failed and he ended up losing his savings. He also considered inviting Kim to see a family psychologist. He even found an excellent specialist, but he was afraid of her resistance. However, before he had a chance to discuss it with his wife, an event occurred that drastically changed everything. One day, Ethan was delayed at work and returned home later than usual. Kim was still not home. The nanny, a kind woman who endured irregular working hours without complaint, was taking care of Hayley. Ethan let the nanny go and quickly prepared dinner for himself. Hayley was already fast asleep in her crib. Ethan entered the bedroom he shared with Kim and looked around. His heart sank, sensing trouble. Something was wrong. Finally, he realised. there were much fewer of Kim's things. He harshly opened his wife's drawer. Many items were missing, including the jewellery he had given her when they were more financially stable, her favourite branded dresses, and other cherished possessions. Kim hadn't taken everything, but only the most beloved and valuable items. Clearly their daughter was not on that list. And then Ethan found a note in the kitchen cupboard that explained everything. It turned out that Kim had met George, a businessman from Germany, on social networks. Their non-committal correspondence quickly turned into something more serious. It turned out that George had even visited Kim several times, and they had spent time together, falling more and more in love with each other, and making plans for the future. In the note, Kim said that she had filed for divorce and given up to their daughter. Ethan felt as if the ground was slipping from under his feet. "Forgive me. It's as if I never existed in your life. Hayley, do whatever you want with her. Raise her yourself or put her in an orphanage. You're also free to give her up and start a new life. She was a big mistake, and I guess our marriage was too. When we met by chance in a bar, I thought there might be something between us, but it didn't work out. We're totally different. We're not right for each other. But I still wish you personal happiness. Be as happy as I am." That was all. That was the end of the letter. Ethan couldn't believe that Kim was really like that. A real monster, cold and calculating. How could she even suggest giving Hayley to an orphanage? Before, Ethan thought that Kim would come to her senses, recover, and become the same nice, caring, cheerful and understanding woman she used to be. After all, their financial difficulties were not so heavy. They couldn't spend money as freely as before, but they had everything they needed and more. Finally, Ethan could admit to himself that Kim had only been with him because of his money. Back then she was distressed and was looking for someone who could lift her out of poverty, support her, and take care of all her financial issues. And she found such a person. Kim was happy for a while, taking advantage of Ethan, who was deeply in love with her. But when he lost his high-paying job and the family's wealth declined, she started looking for another option. After that day, Kim never appeared in Ethan's life again. The man knew she was now living in Germany. He saw a photo of her on her social network page and even tried to contact her, but he was immediately blocked. Ethan thought that eventually she would feel remorse for the child, but it never happened. The man suffered for Kim until fate abruptly shifted his focus to another problem. Hayley was suddenly diagnosed with a rare blood disease. "It's all genetics," the doctor explained. "It would have happened sooner or later anyway." Hayley was only 4 years old at the time. Endless examinations and uninterrupted treatment began. At first, Ethan thought that they would easily find the right therapy to stabilise her condition. He believed that medicine was now advanced enough to help his daughter. However, Hayley had a very rare and insidious disease that was constantly deteriorating her blood. The little girl felt tired all the time. After all these years, Ethan tried to reach out to his ex-wife again. She had already married George, and they even had a little son, Hayley's half-brother. Judging by the photos Ethan sometimes saw on social networks, Kim was a very devoted mother to this child. It gave him hope that now Kim would realise how important she was to their little girl. Maybe she would not be indifferent to the news of her daughter's illness and could help Hayley in some way. Perhaps they could find a German doctor who would prescribe a new treatment and Hayley would recover. However, Kim categorically did not want to communicate with her former husband, and Ethan was able to tell her about what happened to Hayley through one of her old girlfriends only. "She asked me to tell you to forget about her existence." These words were said to Ethan by the same friend. "She asks you to act as if she never existed in your life at all. That's what she said." After this conversation, Ethan realised that he would have to rely only on himself. There was no hope for Kim anymore. And so Ethan continued to fight for the health of his beloved daughter on his own. No one was closer or dearer to him than her. Ethan could not let her down. Hayley grew up to be a kind and smiling girl. Despite her illness, she tried to find joy in life. Ethan was constantly amazed by the simple things that brought delight to his child. A butterfly frozen on a bright yellow leaf, the dance of snowflakes in the air, a sly cat approaching a flock of pigeons. "Daddy, it's so beautiful, look!" The little girl would point her tiny finger at something that had never evoked any feelings or emotions in Ethan before. And he saw that yes, his daughter was right. These were truly wonderful things, worth admiring. Ethan tried to spend every free minute with his daughter. He enjoyed listening to her thoughts and making plans for the future together. Hayley dreamed of becoming an artist and travelling the world with her exhibitions. Looking at her drawings, Ethan realised that it was quite possible. The little girl clearly had talent. He even enrolled her in an art class, but she couldn't attend due to her illness, just like she couldn't go to kindergarten. The insidious disease had weakened her, making her susceptible to infections. But Ethan found a solution. He started inviting the drawing teacher to their home, and she immediately liked Hayley. Well, it was hard not to be charmed by this radiant little girl. Ethan worked hard, but Hayley's treatment, or rather, keeping her alive, was not cheap. However, she did not get better. The doctors were at a loss. "What do you expect?" Ethan heard from them. "The disease is rare and poorly studied. Genetics is always complicated. Unfortunately, your daughter drew the short straw at birth." All the doctors said more or less the same thing. "There are only a few specialists in the world studying this disease. The lines to see them are miles long. The treatment is expensive because each case is unique and requires extensive scientific study. Some patients achieve remission, but others find no relief." Ethan knew the names of all the doctors studying the disease that was slowly but surely killing his daughter. There were only two in the country, Dr. Dumond and Dr. Campbell. Both lived and worked in the capital, and getting an appointment with either of them was impossible. The queues were massive, and even just a consultation with these medical stars would require Ethan to take out a loan. Moreover, their schedules were booked a year in advance. Ethan was constantly told to call back in a couple of months. He called almost every week, but always received the same answer. "There are no available appointments. Call back in a month or two. Maybe something will open up." Ethan felt devastated and powerless as he looked at his daughter. Hayley was fading away every day, growing weaker and paler. Shadows appeared under her large turquoise eyes, just like her mother's. It was unbearable to watch. Ethan took a vacation from work and took Hayley to the hematology centre in the capital, where she would receive a maintenance course. Although this didn't provide a definite cure, it gave the girl some time. Ethan clenched his teeth, hoping for months and years of life for his daughter. She had to wait for treatment. However, even dedicated doctors who have spent their lives fighting such diseases might not be able to help. Ethan knew this well, but he had to try in case Hayley happened to be one of the lucky ones who recovered. There were chances, and not insignificant ones. He just had to find a way to reach these doctors. Every morning, Ethan would take his daughter to the clinic for the necessary procedures. Afterwards, he would bring her back to the rented apartment. Ethan hoped that after the treatment his daughter would feel better. This had happened before. Hayley would fall ill, be hospitalized, receive shots, medicine, drips, and blood transfusions, and undergo either complex and undoubtedly painful medical procedures. And for a while, Hayley would recover, even gaining weight. Her cheeks would regain their pink colour, and her movements would become lively. Ethan had hoped for the same outcome this time, but it didn't work. Hayley remained weak and indifferent, as usual. She even stopped drawing because it was difficult for her to hold pencils and brushes. She spent all day lying in bed. Ethan asked the doctors questions, but they just waved their hands and explained that the disease takes its toll, and this is what happens to children like Hayley sooner or later. They can only act on instructions. In her case, she needed experimentation, an individual approach, and targeted help. It all came down to the fact that the girl needed to see Dr. Campbell or Dr. Dumond as soon as possible. Ethan tried to have his daughter admitted to the hospital for round-the-clock observation by medical professionals. Her condition was worsening. "And your daughter doesn't have any urgent indications," replied the doctors. "Her condition is stable for now and doesn't require emergency treatment." Suddenly, Ethan realized that if he didn't see with any of the doctors while he and Hayley were in the capital, if he took his daughter home after rehabilitation, nothing would help Hayley. This thought filled him with fever, and Ethan decided, no, he would not leave empty-handed. He would find these doctors no matter what it took. He is ready to break into their homes, wait for them after work, and even sneak into the operating room, but force one of them to treat Hayley. Even if he has to face consequences for his actions, he will get what he wants after all. And now Ethan was sitting on a bench in the park, across the street from where the hospital where Dr. Dumond worked. Dr. Campbell was out of the country, attending an international conference. Ethan knew what this doctor looked like, a middle-aged man slightly older than him, with dark hair, attentive brown eyes, well-defined cheekbones, a straight nose and a strong chin. It was not the first day that Ethan had been waiting for Dr. Dumond outside the clinic. He always waited until Hayley fell asleep and then took up his position. Unfortunately, he couldn't stay away for long because he didn't want to leave Hayley all alone, but as long as she was asleep he could keep waiting for the doctor. The desperate father was willing to do anything. Anxious thoughts swirled in his head. In recent days, anger, hatred and envy of the parents of healthy children have consumed Ethan's soul. Ethan was grappling with his own emotions. He had always considered himself to be a good person. However, in his current situation, he was willing to do terrible things just to save Hayley. If need be, he'd even take Dr. Dumond hostage if it helps his daughter. "Why do you look so sad?" Ethan was startled by a clear, melodious voice that interrupted his gloomy thoughts. "Why do you look so sad?" Ethan was startled by a clear, melodious voice that interrupted his gloomy thoughts. He turned around to find a little boy sitting beside him on the bench. The child, who appeared to be around 7 years old, had big blue eyes, a button nose speckled with freckles, and a curious expression. His shaggy blonde hair wanted a trim, but there was something endearing about it. The boy seemed to come from a caring, yet financially struggling family. His clothes were outdated, likely passed down from another child, and his sneakers were dusty and well worn. However, his shirt was clean and pressed. "Why are you sad?" the boy asked again. "Oh, it's nothing. I'm just lost in thought," Ethan replied. "No, I can see that, but don't worry, everything will be all right. Sometimes things start off bad, but they eventually get better," the boy reassured the man. "You're right," Ethan smiled. It was impossible not to smile when looking into those clear blue eyes. There was an innocence and brightness in the boy who radiated a special energy. "Why are you wandering around here all by yourself? Where are your parents?" Ethan looked around, concerned that such a young child was walking alone without much caution. It wasn't proper for a child of his age to approach and strike up a conversation with a stranger. "I'm alone today. My grandma is sick, so I came here to see my friend. He waits for me every day. We help each other," the boy explained. "It sounds like you and your friend have a genuine bond," Ethan remarked with a smile. "Keep that friendship alive. It's rare to find such a connection." "I know," the boy replied with a smile. His missing front teeth made his smile both amusing and endearing. He was a remarkable child, speaking so confidently and naturally. "So your grandmother is sick, and your parents are probably at work. Is that why you're here alone? Does your grandma know where you are? Or did you leave without telling her? Ethan inquired. She knows, don't worry, I'm a big boy. I understand everything. And I know how to be cautious around strangers, the boy reassured him. What about me? Ethan asked in surprise. I'm a stranger to you, yet you're talking to me. You seem like a good person, the boy replied innocently. I can tell from the way you look. Ethan's eyes welled up with tears. The child's trust and innocence were heartwarming. He referred to Ethan as good, unaware of the heavy thoughts weighing on his mind. Ethan was willing to commit a crime for the sake of his daughter, yet this boy saw goodness in him. Nevertheless, you should be cautious about strangers. People can be unpredictable, you know. Your parents must have told you that, Ethan cautioned. They didn't, the boy shook his head. I don't know my parents. I don't even remember them. My grandma takes care of me. My parents died when I was very young. They were in a car accident. I was in the car too, but I survived without any injuries. My grandmother always says that the angels saved me because I still have to grow up and make this world a better place. My name is Travis, by the way, and you? I'm Ethan. As they continued their conversation, a woman in a green coat rolled a cart filled with freshly baked goods past them. Ethan couldn't help but notice the longing look Travis gave the cart. It dawned on him that the boy came from a visibly poor family and must be hungry. Travis, did you have breakfast today? Ethan asked, concern evident in his face. A friend of mine gave me a sandwich, but it was a long time ago, the boy said. He was obviously hungry, but he didn't dare to ask due to his modesty and shyness. Ethan caught up with the saleswoman and bought 2 puffy buns with raisins. He handed one to Travis, who immediately devoured it like a hungry wolf. It was a delight to watch the child's appetite for the bun, especially after Ethan's unsuccessful attempt to feed Haley porridge all morning. She hadn't eaten anything recently. And the second bun for you? Travis asked. Why don't you eat it? It's delicious. No, it's for my daughter, Ethan replied. He thought that maybe Haley would like to try at least a piece of the flavourful pastry. He would be happy if she could eat even a quarter of it. Wow, you have a daughter. What's her name? How old is she? Haley. She just turned 6. Why didn't you take her to the park? The weather is so nice. We could have gone for a walk or a run. You see, Travis, Haley is sick. A fever? The naive kid asked. He probably doesn't know that there are worse diseases in the world. No, it's more serious than that. I wish she only had a fever. Unfortunately, it's something blood-related. Something hematologic. Ethan stared at the child in amazement. How would he know such words? It didn't match the image of a snuggle-toothed, toothless boy. Wow, how do you know such things? My friend knows a lot about diseases. He tells me sometimes, Travis explained. You know, your daughter needs fresh air and positive emotions. I agree, Ethan sighed. Travis surprised him more and more. But Haley is too weak to walk in the park. Then let me visit her at your place. Do you live far away? I want to be a doctor when I grow up. I already know how to make Grandma feel better when I put my hand on her forehead. And your grandma won't mind if you visit strangers? She won't, assured the little fellow. She knows I'm good at judging people, and I can spot the bad ones from a mile away. Ethan thought for a moment. On one hand, this wonderful boy was right. Haley really needed positive emotions. Ethan didn't know how to please his daughter. She showed no interest in toys and cartoons. She couldn't eat chocolate or sweets, and she lacked communication with other children. And here is Travis with his tempting offer. Ethan realized he might get into trouble for it. However, he decided to take the risk for the sake of Haley. Travis was radiant, open and sensitive. If this little boy would bring even a little joy to Haley, it meant that Ethan's risk was worth it. When Ethan and Travis entered the apartment, Haley was no longer asleep. She was lying on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. When she saw the unfamiliar boy her father had brought, the girl became slightly animated, her eyes lighting up with interest. "Who is this?" she asked, raising herself on her elbows. "It's me, Travis," the boy introduced himself. "Your dad and I have become friends. I've come to visit you." "And I'm Haley." "I know. Ethan's told me. I know you're sick." "Yes," the girl nodded sadly. "Well, don't worry. Doctors are good now. They can cure everything. You know, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor too." "And I want to be an artist." "Are you good at drawing?" "Yes," Haley answered proudly. Ethan was pleased to hear her voice. Previously, his daughter had been indifferent to everything, but suddenly she joined the conversation so vividly. "Dad, take out my folder with drawings. I'll show Travis." Travis climbed onto the blanket next to Haley, and she began to show him her masterpieces. Travis looked at the drawings with interest, and Haley told him something about each one. They were clearly enjoying their time together. Ethan smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm and went into the kitchen in this space. He decided to take a moment to prepare something for dinner. Perhaps with Travis around, Haley would eat well too. Occasional childish laughter could be heard from the room. It was surprising because Haley had rarely smiled lately. An hour later, Ethan walked Travis back to his house. It wasn't far from their apartment, just an old 5-story building behind the park. "Haley's very sick," Travis said sadly on the way home. "I'll ask my friend how to cure her. He will help. He's smart, you know." Ethan only smiled. A naive little boy. He probably thinks that his friend, who is most likely a little older than he is, and who has watched a medical program, is intelligent. It's funny, but sad too. "Can I come to you tomorrow too?" "Of course," Ethan smiled, "at the same time. You don't have to come earlier. Haley will be at the hospital." "Okay, I'll definitely come." "You'll help me a lot if you babysit her once I'm away on business." Ethan suddenly realized that while they had Travis around, he would have more time to catch Dr. Dumond. "I'll definitely sit with Haley. She's such a good girl, not like Megan, a troublemaker from the neighbourhood. Haley really does draw beautifully." The next day, Travis kept his promise and appeared at the appointed hour. Haley was already waiting for him. The girl had prepared a board game that she thought would please her new friend. Ethan left the kids and went to the clinic, but again Dr. Dumond never showed up. In the end, Ethan had to return to the apartment. Haley was asleep again. When Ethan came back, he noticed that she was even paler than usual. "She's getting worse." Travis looked up at Ethan with despair in his eyes. "Can I come with my friend tomorrow? He will definitely help her. He's the smartest and kindest person in the world." Of course, come with your friend," Ethan allowed, upset by his daughter's condition and another failed attempt. "The more the merrier. Haley will be happy to meet your friend." "You too," Travis promised. "You'll be happy with him too, you'll see." The next day started as usual. Ethan woke his daughter up and attempted to feed her some porridge and fruit. Haley managed to eat a couple of spoonfuls and refused the rest. The little girl kept asking her father when Travis would arrive. However, the boy was running late. Ethan had already concluded that his new friend wouldn't visit them that day. Maybe his grandmother wouldn't allow it, or perhaps he got caught up playing with someone and forgot. Travis was so sociable. He had countless friends everywhere. However, the long-awaited doorbell finally came. I wonder if Travis is alone, or if he has come with a friend as he intended, Ethan thought, and opened the door. On the doorstep stood a boy with a wide smile, followed by a restless grown man. And not just any man. It was Dr. Dumond. Ethan could barely maintain his composure from the surge of emotions. What was happening? How was this possible? "Hello, Ethan," said Travis. "Meet my friend, Dr. Dumond. Remember, you aren't allowed to come with him. He's here to help Haley." 2 years had passed since that incredible day. Ethan was back at the capital, in the same park, near the same bench. Only now it was spring, the middle of April. The greenery had just sprouted. The sky was clear and blue, and the sunshine was warm and bright. Ethan sat on the bench, observing Travis and Haley. The children were drawing on the sidewalk and playing around. Both had grown a lot during this time, becoming more mature. Travis was almost a teenager now. He still had the same open eyes and charming smile, but he had become taller, stronger, and more resilient. It was a relief that the boy hadn't lost his spontaneity and openness. He would probably remain that way forever, kind, attentive, and sensitive. Haley was already 8. 2 years ago, Ethan never imagined that his daughter would attend a regular school. At best, he had expected homeschooling, and at worst, Ethan didn't want to think about it now that everything was behind them. "She beat me again! Ethan, she beat me again!" Travis's voice was filled with admiration. Haley smiled proudly and Ethan grinned. He understood that Travis always let Haley win, making her feel strong and agile. The boy knew that she needed positive emotions and self-confidence, so he tried his best. He acted as if he were at least 10 years older than Haley, a little sage. On that memorable day, Ethan could hardly believe that Dr. Dumond himself was Travis's friend. Yes, the boy had mentioned several times that his friend knew about medicine, but he had never imagined that he was one of the 2 most famous doctors in the country. Dr. Dumond turned out to be a very kind and pleasant person. Ethan shared his troubles with him. While the men were talking, the children resumed playing that same board game in the bedroom. Dumond became horrified at the difficulty people had in getting an appointment with him. He was completely unaware of the situation. As a result, he decided to create his own website immediately, allowing patients to contact him directly. Haley was taken into the clinic where Dumond worked. After a thorough and detailed examination, the doctor developed the necessary treatment plan. It was quite expensive, but Dumond personally secured government subsidies for the girl, and she began to recover immediately. Unfortunately, it was not possible to completely cure the disease. Haley will have to take medication for the rest of her life, but from now on, she will be no different from other healthy children. Haley started school on time, attending both regular and art schools. Every year she had to go to the capital for rehabilitation and examinations. Both the daughter and the father were happy about this, as they looked forward to seeing Travis, a wonderful boy who played a significant role in Haley's life. You might be interested in how Travis and Dr. Dumond became friends, considering they came from different backgrounds. Travis met Dr. Dumond at the hospital where his grandmother was admitted. The little boy was anxious about the only native person, cried, and could not calm down in any way. Dumond was the only person who managed to help Travis. During this time, Travis's grandmother was in critical condition. When the danger passed, Dr. Dumond shared the good news with Travis. By that point, the boy and the man had developed an incredible friendship. Travis informed his new friend that he aspired to become a doctor, giving them even more interesting topics to discuss. Dr. Dumond was moved by Travis's story. He didn't want the boy to be in an orphanage while his grandmother was ill, so he took him in. His wife gladly welcomed Travis as a guest. They already had a son of the same age, and the boys got along well. From then on, Travis visited Dr. Dumond. Despite his busy schedule, the man never refused to spend time with the boy and actively participated in his life, understanding that it was difficult for the elderly woman to care for her grandson alone. When Travis tearfully told Dr. Dumond about Haley, he couldn't remain indifferent. With time, Ethan and Dr. Dumond also developed a friendly relationship. The doctor personally ensured that Haley received all the necessary procedures. Sometimes they would discuss other topics, but most often they discussed Travis. His fate now mattered to both of them. "What a wonderful boy," Ethan exclaimed. "I wish I had a son like him." Intelligent and
Most importantly, empathetic, Dumont agreed. The ideal combination for a future doctor. He will save more than one life.